All right, it is recording. So let's not touch that. All right. Welcome, everyone. Good friends, old friends, new friends, and everybody to the Geopolitical Forum. We have reached our second year anniversary, because the first event was in 2023, April 29th. So we're a little past it. We can consider this a celebration of our second birthday. And I'm the host, by the way, Eric Mao. I got this idea to start this group 2 years ago at her suggestion. So that was her idea. Awesome. Here we are after 2 years. Here we are. That's the original. Without her, we wouldn't be here like this, right? So that's great. So today, the agenda is very simple. We have a feature presentation for about an hour. And after that, we have 30 minutes Q&A. So make sure, please, your question is a question related to this topic. We all know the topic. I will repeat the topic a little later. That's all I ask. After 30 minutes of that, it's free for all. Literally free for all. You can say or ask or debate or discuss anything. And literally free for all. There's virtually no time limit, so don't worry about time. What I'm gonna say? Oh yeah, it's the first thing to say is we are in for a shock. Last week, we all here because we survived the shock last month. If not scarred, hopefully no one was scarred, but we definitely survived the shock because the president on April 2nd, he announced the Liberation Day. But I would call the Day of Infamy when he started the tariff war with the whole world. And he sent the stock market and bond market into the tank immediately, and with a lot of tremendous volatility day after day. And also, along with that, he changed the tariff policy day after day, until a few days later, he announced that the tariffs are suspended for 90 days, except with China. Well, we're gonna get to the detail. It's just the introduction. She's the one that will answer your question. I'm just going through the process, right? Except China. Instead, China's tariffs was going up. He boosted up all the way to the eventual 145% on average, I think. It's very hard. It's a very complex thing. So China, in retaliation, posed 125% on U.S. goods exported into China. So at that rate, that's a prohibitive rate. So at that rate, I can imagine the trades between these two countries is virtually stopped. But he can correct me if I'm wrong. He's in the business. I'm just we are here to in 1941, Franklin Delano Roosevelt delivered a speech, the day of infamous speech before Congress. And today, for the infamous day of infamy of our times, Dr. Hermioni Zouridis will deliver a speech at Geopolitical Forum. She will analyze, examine the tariff war. The tariff war is not just tariff war, it's the decoupling of the economic decoupling between the United States and China. That's the topic for the day. Economic decoupling between the United States and China. And that's been going on since the last Trump administration. Last time he was president, 2018, he started a tariff war with China. And his successor, Joe Biden, he didn't let it up. Instead, he added more tariffs. For example, he added 100% tariff on Chinese automobiles into the United States. And also during his administration, there were talks about decoupling from China. In Europe, they talk about de-risking. It's the same thing. So we have this trend of decoupling between these two, the world's two biggest economies, the decoupling. So Dr. Hermioni over here share his analysis about the extent the decoupling could go and whether it will be temporary or permanent. So it's very timely, and we have the very, very, very unique, very, in my mind, it's more objective, more valuable, instead of just talking about ideas, because her approach will be data-driven analysis. So Dr. Zouridis is a data scientist with a passion for uncovering insights through data to drive real-world impact. She holds a PhD in chemical engineering and has a strong background in oncology research, where she used high throughput biological data to discover novel cancer subtypes. Her industry experience includes leading data and AI solutions at AstraZeneca, where she, the jabs, that's what I meant. Yeah. Where she partnered with tech startups to solve complex pharmaceutical challenges. She now specializes in data visualization, bioinformatics, and using real-world data sets such as Airbnb data to support strategic investment decisions. In addition to her technical work, Dr. Zouridis serves as a director of a nonprofit dedicated to helping college women successfully transition into STEM careers. For geopolitics, she's interested in how to use the data to cut through headlines, uncover deeper patterns, and bring clarity to complex global dynamics. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Zouridis.
Thank you all so much for joining me, and thank you, Eric, for hosting, and thank you for the kind introduction. Since Eric's introduction was so kind, I should probably set expectations. So my expertise is in advanced analytics, but not in this space specifically. And a lot of the stuff I was reading were written by like Federal Reserve PhD economists, written for Federal Reserve PhD economists. So like I'm very much a beginner in this space. Also, I don't, this is a very huge space, so we're probably only gonna scratch the surface. And lastly, I think it would be, I don't know if I'm gonna say anything that's particularly shocking to this crowd, since you're all probably very clued up to these topics, but we're just gonna look at it through the lens of data. And what would be cool would be in the future to find ways to look at these things with data so that we do find something that shocks us. Because anyone that's ever worked in data science knows that that's where all the fun is, and that's where all the really big insights come about. So this all started because I was curious, are the U.S. and China decoupling? If so, to what extent? And on top of that, is this just a temporary blip from like the decades-long interconnectedness that they have? Or is this something that's a long-term trend? So I approach these questions by examining data-driven quantitative research from authoritative sources. In particularly, I looked at the Federal Reserve notes from last year and this year. And I've posted this document in Meetup, so you can look at the link, and then any source I have, I've linked it. So if you're ever interested in looking at this stuff, it's all there. And then I also supplemented with research queries to ChatGPT, but I have to confess that I did not corroborate what I found with ChatGPT. So I took it at its word. If I want to be really rigorous, right, we have to, actually make sure that what it's saying is correct, because it makes mistakes. So for our purposes, I'm going to refer to decoupling as the process where two economies reduce their mutual dependency, often due to geopolitical tensions like what we're having, or economic policies, or shifting global dynamics. And why is this relevant to geopolitics? Well, I think understanding it in this way can offer us bigger insights as to what's going on. And I wanted to look at it through data because I wanted to go beyond the mainstream headlines, because when I watch TV or watch social media, I just feel like these things serve more to shape public opinion. So I watch and I'm like, I don't feel like I know anything. And then they say stuff that triggers emotions, right? Like Donald Trump said this, so he's gonna tank the stock market, or Xi Jinping said this other thing, so there's gonna be World War III or whatever they're saying, right? And I think what really shapes our reality, and I've always seen this in data, right, is that it's the underlying stuff that matters. So I think in this case, what really plots the course of history is what people actually end up doing. And when people do stuff, that leaves fingerprints and breadcrumbs that we could look at to try to understand what's really going on. And these things have no emotion because it's in the form of data. And on top of that, I think looking at data from a financial or economic perspective is a really good first step in understanding what's going on, because intuitively, private citizens and companies and financial institutions and governments, they really care about money. They either seek to protect it or they find ways to grow it. And obviously they put a lot of thought into it when they do that. So the key things that I found from this cursory research that I did, the TLDR, so to speak, that we'll talk about more, is number one, decoupling is in fact in progress. The trade volume between the two countries, as Eric alluded to, has decreased sharply in recent years. The trade agreements are shifting, so both countries are prioritizing diversifying their international relationships. And the net foreign direct investment into China from around the world has decreased sharply in the recent years. Total decoupling is probably not likely, at least not in the near future, just due to how complex and interconnected global trade is. So for starters, I'm sure you could speak a lot to this, right? There's billions of dollars worth of goods from China that get re-exported through other countries, and that's that gray area, borderline legal area. Then we see that supply chains are adjusting and rewiring. So the US is importing less from China directly, but the US suppliers are importing more from China. So it's still all connected. And I think it's important for us to not forget that it's not just goods that matter, it's also knowledge and expertise and ideas. And the one thing I found that was really striking to me was that China continues to learn in different ways from US innovation through venture capital investment in US startups. And that really spoke to me from my time in Silicon Valley, that I've seen similar things happen. And we'll talk about it more because they actually back it with data, which was really cool. Lastly, decoupling is a long-term trend and not a temporary deviation. And we see that because China in recent years has really been doubling down on self-reliance, understandably. And their trading patterns, more and more, if you look at the data, is starting to resemble that of an advanced economy. It's just not necessarily there yet, or that's so obvious yet. So that's the TLDR. Now I'll get into talking about all this stuff in more detail. So when I was thinking about decoupling, I thought that I would imagine it has to happen in phases, because it's not like these two economic giants are just gonna say goodbye to each other and just split. So I was curious, what are the factors that change first? What are the things that are stickier and then take a longer time to change? And then what's the current state of those factors? So for phase one of decoupling, what I found was that trade volume and foreign direct investment shift first. So the trade volume, these are the first signals, right? They're most easily adjusted and they're highly visible to the whole world. And they can be influenced quickly by changes in policies. And so we see that the trade volume has dropped sharply. What I have in the document is a summary of the 2018-2019 U.S. China tariff hikes. You could look at them in more detail if you want, but they started in March of 2018, where the U.S. started putting tariffs on metals. Then in July of 2018, the U.S. specifically targeted China. In September of 2018, they expanded those tariffs. then by August of 2019, the U.S. Announced more tariffs, and then finally in January 2020, they paused the tariff hikes, but they remained in place, and I think Biden continued to hold them in place, and now obviously we're in the situation we're in now. I like seeing this in the form of a graph, so I'm not sure how to show this to everyone, but so if we look at the trade volume over time, right, we look at it from 1999 all the way through 2023, right, the volume is increasing. It was increasing kind of slowly up until about 2001 when China joined the World Trade Organization. Then we see the slope go up, increase, even more. Then it continued to go up until finally at this dotted line, we have the tariffs that were announced in 2018, and then it's like coming down.
This is in dollar terms,
Yes.
not in volume terms.
No. Yeah, it's in billions of dollars. And what I'm curious about is what was happening between 2005 and 2017, because you see it getting more volatile and you see it kind of flattening. So that's one thing that I'm always curious about, and I'm just gonna like philosophize, I guess, for a second. Like, I know Trump came in and like put in all these tariffs and created all this chaos that started here, but I think a lot of times politics and major shifts are like downstream of like deeper moods that are happening. Like I see that when I look at stock market data going back 100 years. Like there's these patterns that are like brewing, and then like the big thing happens. So I would just be really curious to know what was happening, or to delve a little deeper into what was happening here. And if, so I don't know. I honestly don't know. I leave that question for everyone in the room to think about. On top of that, the other thing that's very sensitive to policy changes is foreign direct investment. And we see that the net foreign direct investment into China has dropped sharply since 2022. And this makes sense because businesses are very sensitive. So when I was at AstraZeneca, that's a company with thousands of employees. The minute some change would happen, they wouldn't sit there and philosophize about it. They would just be like, well, we have to keep our bottom line. We're gonna find this loophole, or reroute, do this other thing, and just keep working, right? So, and by foreign direct investment here, we mean things like China owning farmland in the United States, or corporations owning factories in other countries. So it's things that they own in a different country that they have direct control over. And I will skip over some of this text, so I'll get to the picture. So we have another cool picture. So this is the foreign direct investment in and out of China. So it's not including it is including the United States, but it's including the whole world. So we're not looking at China and US, we're looking at China versus the world. And it's from 2016 to 2023. And we see that the blue bars are for FDI going into China from the rest of the world. And the red bars is what's going out of China to the rest of the world. And this black line that you probably can't see very well is the net between the two. And we see that around 2022, the net foreign direct investment into China has dropped sharply, whereas China's foreign direct investment outbound is pretty more or less constant, which I guess kind of makes sense because with things going on like Belt and Road Initiative and investments in the global south, if we're not counting the United States, why would it change? The authors of this article from the Federal Reserve point out some reasons why we're seeing this foreign direct investment crashing. So the first is they point out that there's an interest rate gap. So China's still a very export-driven economy. So they'll maintain lower interest rates while other countries maintain higher rates. So it's not very advantageous for your returns. China's real estate sector is kind of unstable. There's, of course, the escalating U.S. China tensions with the U.S. ban on high-tech investment in China starting August 2023. China's also having some internal things, so they're implementing national security and counter-espionage policies that make it difficult for foreign firms to thrive and succeed in that environment. And then, of course, there's China's pursuit of self-reliance that was first vowed by Xi Jinping in 2018, and there's more on that later. So, should I pause? I feel like I'm talking a lot. Like, I don't know if there's any. Eric, would you?
It's up to you. It's up to you.
I just feel
So any
weird. I
questions?
just feel weird talking nonstop for like an hour or so.
I have a question. Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, you do have, you have a lot of information, and I was just thinking about when you said that there's the foreign investment, direct investment from China into the U.S. cause you showed a graph and I think it was the whole world, right? So how much of that is it into the US?
I don't know.
So is it more than what, the US is investing in China?
I don't have it written here, so my memory's foggy, but the foreign direct investment of China into the US was less, I believe, than the US into China, but somebody's gonna have to fact check me on that. And I remember when I looked at the numbers in billions, it wasn't like as big as I thought it would be. But again, this is just me blowing smoke because I just was reading stuff really fast and I don't have it written down.
There were triggers in 2022 that started this actually.
What were they?
Hong Kong was the first one. Second one was because of state investment into manufacturing, which led to overcapacity, which you see the true results right now in the last 7 months because of massive deflation in cost of manufacturing, which we've benefited here in the US.
Sure.
So that led to negative return of investments for everybody, and that's why there was flight capital to Singapore, and there was flight capital back to Europe, flight capital back to US. You see the stock market in China is absolutely null. So it started with Hong Kong. So Hong Kong started getting shut down, the expats started leaving. It's still people at the end of the day.
Right.
So when people started leaving, the know-how left with them. And I mean, Hong Kong was a very, 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 very big financial sector contributing into China. And that started the trigger, that started the downslide. That's one of the big key reasons why you see the FDI going down into China. Interesting.
Yeah, I read about Hong Kong after the riot. That was 2021. So Hong Kong stabilized.
Yes.
So it's supposed to be good for business. But the reason foreigners left or investment left, some of them left, because they felt the Chinese people from mainland become more and more established. So relative to them, the foreigners felt they're at a disadvantage in a lot of ways, and compared to what it was before. So because foreigners were there first, during colonial times, they were there first. So Chinese, the mainlanders, were going in to establish themselves. Over time, well, they're Chinese, so they probably have some kind of host kind of advantage over culture, even the language. So over time, they're even out and they're surpassing the foreigners. That's why they feel they lose some of the advantages. Some of them left. Even though the streets, there's some bars that's frequented by foreigners. They became less busy.
Land court farm is completely empty.
Yeah.
So
So it's,
the problem is that Hong Kong people left. So Hong Kong's had a depopulation. I mean, it's gone down by, I think if I remember correctly, 600,000 people. It's a 7.8 million people country. I'm Chinese, by the way, so I'm not joking. So I'm serious.
yeah, the PRC.
Yeah, I have a Hong Kong passport.
Okay.
So,
Cool.
cool. 600,000 people left, and whoever I speak to has, Hong Kong people have left. People born over there who are not of Hong Kong origin have left, which is not just the white expats who have left, which is what's kind of triggered a lot of the southern China economies problems, because a lot of the money that used to go into southern China for a very long time was from Taiwan and from Hong Kong, because of the interconnectedness. Like Apple, for example, is a Taiwanese company. Foxconn is a Taiwanese company, it's not a Chinese company.
In regards to the black line going down,
Yeah.
China, you said that in part it has to do with the voting belt initiative.
And that's just me speculating. Like,
Oh,
so
okay.
because the Federal Reserve looked at just the net foreign direct investment of China and the rest of the world, right? Like, it's just showing that China is maintaining pretty constant in terms of its outbound investments, which is not surprising since, like, we'll talk further about their self-reliance and how they're investing more in the global south and in their Belt and Road Initiative, right? So I can't speak to how much they've changed their investments in the United States, but definitely nothing's changed with the rest of the world.
But another reason, I think maybe starting late 2021, the entire country of China is under the quarantine from the pandemic.
COVID, yeah.
So Xi Jinping has that political policy. He wants to kill unbelievable. So, and all the Chinese visa are not issued to any foreigners.
Really?
Yeah, so they cancel all the visa services. You are not allowed to leave the country, and you are not allowed to get into a country. If you are a Chinese citizen, you have to quarantine for 7 weeks once you land in Hong Kong before you go inside the China mainland. So the entire country is blocked.
Even like right now in 2025?
No.
No, right now.
No.
I think it opened up maybe early last year, the visa services, but it has been quarantined over a year.
Correct.
Yeah, the Chinese residents, they are quarantined in their own condos or apartments.
Wow.
They're not allowed to go anywhere. That really breaks down another entire economy.
That's a very, very good point. It triggered a lot of the expats leaving from northern China.
If you are U.S. citizen, you are allowed to leave. But some U.S. citizens they choose to stay because they have families in China. They are not allowed to leave. So.
Correct.
Wow.
Yeah.
Very good point.
Very cool.
The structure of the Chinese government is not as transparent as other nations, let's say. Does that present a problem with, as a data analyst, do you get everything you need, or do they withhold some stuff, or?
So all of the paper, probably, but all of the papers I've looked at are what the Federal Reserve published, and they're looking at things kind of like from an American perspective, so we'll see on the other graphs, right? So like if something's getting imported into here and in the origin is China or whatever, like it's getting captured in our data. Now what's actually happening inside of China, I don't know what those data sets are and how to trust them or how to vet them. Yeah. I know like hedge funds and stuff like that, they try to find really crafty ways to figure out what's happening in China. Like they'll take like satellite images or like different things of like cement usage as like a proxy for the real estate, and they try to find, or electricity usage, and they try to find clever ways to like try to short their market or whatever. But
And see if it matches up with the data that's being given.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I would imagine those data sets are like complex and hard to get your hands on. I haven't attempted it at this time. I think that would be a lot of work for, unless we all wanted to for some reason.
The Chinese buy CDs, treasury bonds. They hold the debt of America.
Yes.
How much trillions?
$760 billion.
So I think it's not trillions.
No. Japan is the highest. I think it's below a trillion, if I'm not mistaken.
So 760 billion. That's real money.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, is there any talk about that?
They.
It's out of scope from what I was looking at, since I was looking at the Federal Reserve stuff. But yeah, please.
So they started it in the early 2000s with the China initiative to come to Hong Kong to make the renminbi stronger, because global trade is highly impacted by your currency, and they did not want to deal in US dollars. They wanted to do it in renminbi or Chinese yuan. So what happened was, because of the trade deficit, they have actually nowhere to park their money. There's just nothing, nowhere to go.
Yeah.
So they've had this on their agenda for the last 20 years, and there's been talk about trading in yuan. The global trade is 96% in US dollars. And there has been no opportunity for them to. So again, just a 2-cent opinion, I doubt very much they'll ever be able to go away from the US dollar to trade. It's virtually impossible.
So
They can't dump it.
as a follow-on, what's I guess value in China holding U.S. bonds?
Nowhere to go.
Just
Where will
just
they go?
as a safe
So
investment.
see, if they buy Chinese yuan, it appreciates the currency, and that screws their economy much more than what it is right now.
I
The
thought-
economy is slowing down dramatically.
I thought the Chinese had a policy of devaluing their currency to make exports more competitive.
And that also caused a problem, because when they did that, there was a massive flight of capital from China into Singapore and other countries, because the Chinese started feeling. See, the Chinese are sitting on a lot of cash, in not just in real estate or this thing, but actually a lot of cash, because the companies have been extremely profitable for the last 20 years. So if you look at the top tier luxury market in Hong Kong and in Singapore, I'm talking about like plus $2 million worth of property. It's owned by mainland Chinese today. And that's because of flight of capital from China into these countries in whichever way possible. So they realized when they tried to depreciate their currency to boost up exports, that there was like massive dysfunction internally because there was flight of capital because of that, because the sentiment changed. So Chinese didn't want to keep money in China and wanted to keep it outside. So that's also a bigger problem then for them.
Thanks.
Pretty cool. So that was the first phase of decoupling. Those are the things that adjust very rapidly. The next phase is the stickier stuff. Like when people start to say, okay, this is here to stay, then there's like factors that are stickier that people start to shift. So in this case, it would be things like supply chains and trade agreements. So I think you're gonna have a lot to say about this. So supply chains, right? They're sticky and they require time to reconfigure. You know, moving a factory and getting employees and all of that in a different country and setting up the routes for that is going to take time. Additionally, trade agreements tend to be political and bureaucratic, and they need to be renegotiated with like diplomacy and all of these things. It's not something that happens overnight. And when we look at this, we see that decoupling has definitely surpassed this initial phase of the rapidly adjusting trade volume and foreign direct investment, because these stickier factors are also starting to adjust. So we see that the supply chains are rewiring, and the Federal Reserve has this graph that I'll show you in a second where they're showing there's increasing substitution of Chinese imports from other countries. And they use this mathematical term called elasticity, to show how much trade flows respond to the tariffs. So meaning the elasticity of the substitution across the U.S. trade partners. So the higher the elasticity, the greater the response. So here we have it. It's going up, and like once the tariffs were put in place, this elasticity initially started not really changing, because you can't just move a factory overnight or change.
And that was in 2018.
This
right?
was in 2018. And so we see that the elasticity starts low. It hovers around 1 within a year, so people are feeling the pain of the tariffs. But then over the following few years, it quadruples and the elasticity goes up to 4. So,
Sorry, may I ask?
Yes.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on what does it mean, elasticity? Is this?
yeah, I can't, because the Federal Reserve is writing it in a way that they're assuming that So like they use this like log ratio. Like basically what they did was there's this really fancy equation, and they're looking at like kind of like the relative ratios of all goods getting imported into the United States, and looking at like sort of like a log likelihood ratio of that same good in different countries,
Okay.
and then they collapse it into this one factor called elasticity. So what this one graph is actually the culmination of loads of data and fancy equations to arrive at the fact that our substitution rate has quadrupled in like the past few years.
So elasticity, the way I interpret what you're saying is that instead of buying from China, we're outsourcing to other countries of goods of similar
Yes.
thing, and
Yes.
that would make sense.
Yes.
China
As-
plus one.
Huh?
China plus one. So every importer in the US now since 2018 has the China plus one strategy.
Yep.
So
Well, yes and no.
I'm with you.
So my clients since for the period of 2000 to 2024, I was doing mostly pharmaceuticals. Okay, and that's a different commodity. But before that, and also now, what I am seeing is, a lot of textile goods that used to be put in China and footwear, those are being moved to places like Bangladesh and Thailand. And that was already starting because those are high labor intensive. China's economy is getting much more advanced. So high labor intensive industries like textiles are moving to where the labor is cheaper. And Bangladesh and Thailand and places like that have much lower labor. A lot of the Chinese labor now are going into what we would consider heavy goods, machinery, construction equipment, robotics, stuff like that.
true.
And that's what I've been seeing. Now, in the past few months with the high tariffs, my customers have been freaking out. When they passed the high tariffs this past month in April, my customers were like, they were calling us every day trying to figure out what the tariff rate is eventually going to go to. And right then we didn't really know, because Trump was like, he was kind of on again, off again, and then he put in the 25%, additional that already was on 25% on Chinese goods, and then he was putting 10% across the board for all the other countries. And by the way, the 10% is still in place. The only thing he's done was put a 90-day referendum on any additional new tariffs. And just on a personal level, I clear freight every day. It's driving me nuts, because before 2018, I only had to deal with one tariff number, unless it was in a special agricultural use or some other special use, then I would go into the other chapters. Now, I have to keep track of Chinese tariffs. I have to keep track of maybe 5 different tariff numbers. And there's exclusions. And that's something that the data doesn't really tell you there, is that when 2018, when the tariffs first came out, they realized that they couldn't source everything in the United States. So what they did is companies went to their congressman, they went to their senator, and they developed exclusions. And the exclusions kind of distorted the whole thing, because there are certain products, and I had to run a compliance report at that time, because I was working in a compliance for a company. And every day I would run this report, and I would go through the products and try to see if the products were excluded or not excluded. And it was a very technical, detailed thing, and I had to send out a bunch of emails, because it was really a mess. And actually, Biden, what he did after Trump left, was out of office, and Biden administration came in, a lot of the exclusions expired in 2024. Right. So everything now from China has the base 25% rate, and then Trump just put in additional tariffs all the way up to 145%. What Eric was alluding to earlier.
Yeah. You're spot on. And I think from tomorrow it's going to get worse with de minimis going away.
Oh, de minimis has already gone away. We got a CSMS message from Customs in the past 2 weeks saying that anything that's $800. See, de minimis, just for people who don't understand what that term means, de minimis is like if you got something less than $800, you can basically get it in without doing a formal entry on it, without doing any entry on it. In fact, you can a lot of places like FedEx or UPS, they can do what you call a manifest release. They'll just transmit Customs the tariff numbers or whatnot, and Customs will just clear it, and they don't have to pay duty on it because it's under $800. And actually, $800 was under the Obama's when he signed the Trade Facilitation Trade Enforcement Act of 2013, I think it was, or 2014, one of those years. And before that, it was only $300 de minimis, and then they raised it up to $800 de minimis. But now anything out of China doesn't have any de minimis. In fact, you can't even do an informal entry on it. You have to do a formal entry on it. And the difference between an informal and a formal entry is like you pay the full merchandise processing fee, and you have to go through the 360-day liquidation cycle. Informal entry, you don't have to worry about the liquidation cycle. And the liquidation cycle means that Customs can come back within a year, and they can adjust your duty rate, and you might have to pay additional duties.
CBP is not ready for it.
Huh?
CBP is not ready for this.
You know what? CBP has screwed us over because their guidelines didn't really reflect what the regulations stated. So we've been going back to them and asking them to clarify it, and they just recently clarified some things for us, like the duties, not the Chinese duties, of course, but the other countries, the 10%. When do they kick in? Is it what about the shipments that go into Canada and then get railroaded to the United States? Are they incorporated? And they just came out and said no. Those, the vessel docks in Montreal or something like that in Canada and gets put on the rail, you still have to pay the 10%. The leaving the country before April 4th doesn't apply to those shipments. It has to be loaded on a vessel before April 5th. You know? So all these rules are complicated, and the industry is like trying to figure out. So we're going to have to go back and do a bunch of corrections. And Customs is getting very, very aggressive on making sure that the duties are paid, and not just from China. They're also doing it across all the other the Liberation Day reciprocal tariffs.
Right.
You know, I mean, it's just horrible.
Yeah, and I mean, so based on this elasticity metric, the Federal Reserve authors were saying that it's changed so much that like it's probably, they imply it's kind of here to stay because they cite historical things of like trade agreements or different tariffs and stuff going into place, and the effects that we're feeling could take up to 15 years from what they've seen from historical data to fully take effect, which is quite interesting. And now, maybe you have stuff to say about this too, but like one thing that is gonna inhibit the supply chain decoupling, even though we're seeing that this elasticity is going up and up, is there's a lot of re-exports from China that will likely persist, at least in the near term. So by re-export, it's the process where you import goods into a country and then you export it without a significant
So
modification.
those tariffs are also due. So it's not technically a re-export because a re-export is, so unless the components in the actual product change beyond a certain percentage,
Okay.
it's treated as a re-export or not a re-export, and the tariff is based on that. So
Well,
every country has it differently.
I can expand
even if you
upon
like
that.
re-export something, let's say through Hong Kong,
So you
you're
go
gonna
to
pay a
Hong Kong
China
and you
tariff.
change a label
Yeah, so
on
you
my
just change the-
T-shirt, that is not legal because you are basically cheating the system.
But
Yeah,
it's
you
still
can go
happening.
to prison
Yeah,
for
of
that.
course, it's like massive undercutting
Yeah.
right now. The top 3 consolidators into the United States, which is, you know, the strongest part. So shipments move on basically 3 modes. And the second mode, which is less than a full container,
Mhm.
the top 3 providers in the last 5 years are Chinese companies.
Mhm.
And not being nastier, but the primary reason for them to become so strong in a market dominated by American and German companies is because of underpricing.
Right.
So the cost of the goods are underdeclared by a lot, or they are getting under one IOR, one importer and record, and distributed to different trading companies. So that's why today in the market where it was like the top 10 companies were Japanese, German, or American. That's it.
Mhm.
There was nobody around, and this is you're talking about 30% of the market. Now that's completely changed in the last 4 years since 2018.
Yeah, like I was trying to play with ChatGPT to get like estimates of like, cause I was seeing like things in my research that re-export is huge and it's a big problem and it's, you know, and I couldn't get an estimate of how many billions.
Yeah,
And ChatGPT was saying, we can't tell you because it's this gray area. And I was just quite frustrated. I know the numbers are big,
You'd
but
see-
I can't tell you how big.
You will see the immediate impact in Canada, for example, with de minimis going away. So a lot of the product is staged in China. Forget Mexico for a moment, which is much larger, this thing. But maybe from a North America point of view, Canada is a little bit more closer for us to relate to in day-to-day terms. So decoupling, you'll see the immediate impact in Canada because these warehouses used to stage goods for us. So they would bring a very large lot, put it into the warehouse, and then ship it to what you were explaining, sorry.
Why do-
Below $800. Okay. So that's how Canadian logistics works to a large extent. Now that's gone because you cannot do it any longer. So you are going to pay a lot of money for processing a shipment which is just $10. The $10 T-shirt days are gone. The Temus and Sheins are gone. Us in USPS subsidizing billions of dollars of taxpayer money to Temu and Shein to actually get this freight into the United States is all gone since yesterday.
And I do want to reiterate, I do have one customer that brings in stuff from Germany, right? And Poland. And Germany and Poland buy stuff from China and they put it with other goods. But when you have a commercial invoice of sale, you have to list the country of origin for each one of those pieces.
Sure.
Okay, and also keep in mind, there's customs does have the right to audit the books. You know, and that's why it keeps everybody honest. They can audit the books and find out where the country of origins are from. And if it's steel or something like that,
Yeah.
the scientific analysis, they can tell where that steel was originated from.
Wow.
But they would they would have to sample that.
Sure. That's fascinating.
But that's something that can be done in the customs labs.
And it looks like it's gonna get stricter because so when I was researching this, I'm like, this has blockchain written all over it, right? Like
I thought it was more AI.
So
Because
both, right?
yeah, to this point.
I haven't seen a lot of blockchain in
No,
the
we've not seen
paperwork.
any blockchain at all yet.
So
They
I
talk
was,
about it.
In fact, they shut down blockchain in shipping.
because I found different articles from this year saying that the Customs and Border Patrol was doing proofs of concept with different technology startups that were using blockchain technologies to like monitor things in the supply
So
chain.
it's all companies here now are completely fed. The whole manual is in AI. They're
Sure.
not being manually classified with some of the biggest companies, even mid-sized companies have started doing that. So getting a customs broker license, you can speak a lot more on this. I don't come from the brokerage side. Is a very complicated, difficult process here, and that process now slowly moves towards AI and becomes more and more automated. And to your point, CBP has become far more stricter. But I don't think they have the manpower.
But AI, right? It'll tell you like, you can find ways to assess maybe the risk of like different nodes or whatever. But if you have multiple entities, if you have the goods changing hands, right? Wouldn't you want something like blockchain that you can't tamper with, that you can very easily query, that you could instead of like going through days, right, to figure out like to track steel going through the system, you can query it and get the answer in like a second, right?
I agree with you, and that's how it started, 15 years back, where all the shipping, freight forwarding community started on that platform, that it will universalize exactly what you're saying. But after 10 years of work, all those investments are down to zero. In the industry, there's nobody who's doing blockchain.
Yeah,
right
because it complicates something that's already a very
Easier to
complicated
do.
process.
In 2024, Congress introduced the Border Security and Blockchain Technology Act.
Yeah, which is
What's
Well, they might introduce it, but
no
implementing it
industry
is
is
totally different.
Nobody in the industry is using it.
Yeah, I very rarely see anything like. If I had blockchain,
Yeah,
that would make my entry process a little bit easier
right.
by taking all that data and building a basic electronic invoice.
Sure, yeah,
And then I could take that data, a secured data,
yeah.
and feed it into my ABI software,
Mhm.
assign all the classifications to it and all that, and then transmit it to customs. That would actually make my life a lot easier.
Yeah,
So AI is doing that now. So the reason blockchain has completely tanked is because the data that was available was not restricted. It was open book and not universal. So the market leaders would sit on data which a small provider, with showing small providers work, and that would screw the small provider because data is everything in the business.
yeah.
Right.
So that's the reason why blockchain completely collapsed here, because of its transparency.
Yeah, and a lot of companies are still doing paper. Like meal test certificates for steel,
Yeah.
they're still paper. There is no electronic meal test certificate. So a meal test certificate is like if you get steel, you take aluminum. Aluminum's a little bit easier for me to explain. Bauxite, which Canada is the world's largest producer of bauxite ore. That's aluminum ore. Then the ore goes to somewhere like, and there's various countries, Iceland, Norway, Germany, China, even India has the capability to take that bauxite and melt it down into just a basic aluminum, and then that basic aluminum, gets assigned a meal test certificate, and the meal test certificate tells you all the chemical elements that are in that alloy, because it's not just pure aluminum. they mix it with other stuff to either make it harder or mix it with chromium to make the aluminum a little bit more shinier and stuff like that. And that mill test certificate gets sent to me along with the commercial invoice, and I will look at it and I will determine the classification based on the mill test certificates a lot of times. Like metal, like steel. Steel, you have to have a certain amount of copper, or no, not carbon, to differentiate stainless steel and wrought iron and stuff like that. Chromium and carbon are two most important elements. Okay, and then I will take that mill certificate. It will help me to verify the tariff classification, and then once the tariff classification is verified, then I can transmit the data to customs, and customs will say, well, we want the mill test certificate to prove that the classification is correct.
Sure.
And some commodities are a lot more difficult than others. In fact, it's getting even more difficult for a lot of commodities, because not only do you have to worry about customs, you got to worry about all the partner government agencies like the EPA. One of the big things about China some years ago was making furniture with formaldehyde, and then the EPA passed the formaldehyde rules, so they have to get a third party to certify that the furniture doesn't have formaldehyde in it. So there's a lot of complexities in the supply chain, and it's not it's just a lot of paperwork, and it's hard to duplicate that in a blockchain.
Sounds like there's like a missing privacy element. You can't choose who you share it with in there, and there's also
So if you're a firm doing shipping and I'm a firm, I'm doing shipping, if I have your data, I can easily go to your customers.
yeah, just
So
go
you
right
are
around.
not going to ever encourage that. And the bigger I am, the worse it is for you, because I have a lot more buying power. So that's why the blockchain completely collapsed from the shipping point of view, from the logistics point of view.
So if they pass this law, though, wouldn't ultimately people have to comply to that?
Yeah, which is
They
the
would have
law.
to implement the law,
Correct.
and it takes years to implement a law. Case in point, in 2006, Bush signed in the Safe Ports Act. Okay, it took them until 2011, 2009, but then they became more enforced by 2012, implementing that where we have to actually transmit data before the vessel even leaves a foreign port to customs.
Well, if they passed it, then that means like by 2030, by that time.
Well, it depends on the complexities. Like the Bioterrorism Act of 2006 was passed, but it took over. They're still working on that, but they got the basic elements. Like one of the things that came out of that with FDA was the food safety verification program, the prior notice of imported goods, and then FDA also has a system called Predicts. So if salmonella or a foodborne virus or waterborne virus or bacteria or whatever erupts on any part of the globe, FDA has a system in place where any of the food products that comes from that region will be examined. They will be as soon as they come into the country, they will not be allowed into commerce, and then FDA will go and take samples to make sure that it's safe, and then the importer can bring it in. And a lot of times that causes a lot of costs for your importer because they have to store it somewhere and then they can't just readily send it out, so they're not going to get paid until the product is ready to distribute.
So is that legislation, the blockchain legislation, is it completely useless, or do you guys think it'll be implemented and to modernize things? And second part of the question, if the shipping industry was not lobbying for it, was it just like Silicon Valley that was pushing this through?
No, actually, because blockchain is very old. It's not anything new.
Yeah.
And you know how it becomes like every headline today is about AI, and AI stocks are doing well. So you'll have customers call you and say like, "Oh, what's your AI strategy?"
Yeah.
I'm like,
Customers
just
calling the lawmakers?
No, I'm
like,
thinking like,
but who is actually lobbying for it if it's not?
which is where this is like, I don't know who's lobbying for it right now, and I don't even know how this law came out because it doesn't even make the news in our industry. What I'm saying is 10 years ago, 13, 14, I don't even remember, but it completely got shut down by all the industry leaders about 3 years back. So blockchain was completely kaput. All the universalization of data that we have for transparency is completely shut down by the industry. Completely
So
zero.
was it like Silicon Valley that was pushing a lot?
But wouldn't
for it?
that be? But that would be very, very beneficial with the forced labor rules that we have to abide by.
From a product point of view, yes. From a visibility point of view, from a shipment visibility point of view, from a customer data point of view.
Could they
no.
like anonymize? And I think we're digressing, but like somehow anonymize the different entities participating in the blockchain?
Cannot, because the data itself is already transparent. So all import data, unless you choose to opt out of it, is now completely visible. So that's already caused problems in the industry. It's a benefit also, but it's caused problems. Whoever is doing what in this country is completely visible. What you're importing from where is completely visible.
Import genius. Yeah,
Many-
that's what you're
many
referring to
products.
as import genius, right?
Yeah, data mine, import genius,
Yeah.
peers, hundreds of companies
Okay.
now.
In fact, I have truckers call me.
Sorry, I have to leave a little bit early.
Okay.
That's good discussion.
I have truckers call me about loads that I'm working on that they should not even have known about because the terms are sailed doesn't allow me to. It's already a door move with the steamship line, right? So I'm not doing delivery. But these truckers get the data from Import Genius, and then they call me asking me if they can handle the load, and they don't even know what the Incoterm is. You know, it's like.
The other side of that would probably be, sorry, I have it in mind, but move on until I remember.
Okay.
Alright, so yeah, so even with all this re-export going on, blockchain may or may not be implemented at some point in the future, but what we still see in the data is that not only, another issue is that the US suppliers are importing more from China, even if it's for their own internal consumption. So like, and I'll show you the graphs, right? Like, so regardless of whether they're just like doing the gray area re-export stuff, they're actually, at least what the data shows, is that they're importing a lot more from China anyhow. So in this graph,
Hey, I got a question. How old is that data?
it's as recent as, the papers are all from 2024 and 2025. The data is from like, the most recent is like 2023 and 2022.
Okay, so that's going to really change in 2026.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
But the mega trends are still in place because, like, if you look at from 2017 through 2022, China's share of the average U.S. suppliers' imports has gone up, while the China's share of U.S. imports has gone down. So, like, if Germany or whoever is a big supplier to the U.S., but Germany is still relying on, even if they're not like exporting the Chinese goods, like, there's still that interconnectedness that's there, right?
Your graph's gone.
What are those two lines again?
Yes.
The black line, yeah, I wish there was a way to. So the black line is China's share of average U.S. supplier imports, which is increasing over time, even though the red line is the Chinese share of imports to the U.S. going down.
What is a U.S. supplier in this case?
So it would be like Mexico or something, Vietnam, like all the other countries that the U.S. does business with.
All the entire component that an automotive is a perfect example right now, which is there's so much this thing. What goes into an automobile? China literally has a full monopoly of the market.
Yes.
Just because the vehicle is produced in Canada or in Alabama or in Mexico, the actual components that go into it from a seat, spring, or whatever is Chinese.
Everything?
And I have graphs of that. It's like shocking how much
Yeah.
that's increased in the past few years.
Automotive, you might think it's a German vehicle.
No.
When you BMW doesn't make your seat.
Yeah.
BMW doesn't make your steering wheel. It comes from a Chinese manufacturer, even though it's German technology.
So even
and
if it's not-
completely copyrighted.
Right, so even if they're not re-exporting it, which is what we just talked about, like that gray area or that barely legal, that illegal area, like to your point, right, if you're getting a BMW car from Germany, it's still Chinese stuff.
I
As
used
long
to
as
go
it
to this
meets the
seating
pre-
manufacturer in Clanton, Alabama. Clanton's very famous because of John Christian book. It's the middle of nowhere, shit town, and really it's like one of the shittiest towns you can ever visit. And you go to a seating factory and then you look at they're just assembling a seat. There is nothing else. All the entire line is coming from Germany or from China.
And remember that the rules of origin are kind of complicated, but you don't have to have 100% of the product components to get country of origin like Germany. I think you might, as long as you get about 40 or 50 or 60%.
That's it.
Yeah.
I think it's partly where it was finished. So I have boots from, they're probably Chinese, but it says Vietnam on there. So they made 80% in China, sent it to Vietnam to be finished.
Well,
And
what,
it went to-
most likely what happened, China produces the cows, it gets the hides from the cows. They send the hides to Vietnam, or actually they might even produce it, take the green hides and turn them into finished hides. Then the finished hides go to Vietnam to be cut and sewn with the soles and everything, depending on what kind of sole it is. And then Vietnam's already got the labor cost involved and all the additional components like the threads and all that, and that comes in as Vietnamese goods.
And the factory is owned by China.
And this, so talking about the German cars or whatever, so we have a bunch of graphs, right, where they break it down by the different trading partners of the U.S. So you have ASEAN, which is Association of Southeast Asian Nations, European Union, Canada, Mexico, yeah, they just have some highlight ones. So the red line, yeah, so the red line to these trading partners to the U.S. is the red line is China's import share increasing to these major U.S. trading partners. And then this dashed blue line underneath is also increasing. And that is a term that they're using called like a value added good or whatever. So what they're saying is that they're not only are they importing stuff from China that it's like, you know, small things, right? It's things that like have a significant value add to them. So that would be something probably like a complex car part. So the U.S. thinks they're being so clever, right? Like imposing all these tariffs and like focusing on their the other suppliers or whatever, when in fact it's still China behind it all.
No, but US recognizes it because it has, for example, the whole strategy with Vietnam is to stop the backdoor exports out of China. So they recognize it. Like if a pair of sports shorts are made in Vietnam, it's a Vietnamese product. The actual nylon and the sports shorts coming from China. So that's why what he said was correct.
So how does that affect like an Audi that you buy here in the U.S., right? Like the complex components are still originating in China.
Yes.
Audi's a German company. How does that all like come together then?
The IP is with Germany.
Right.
The R&D is with Germany. The production to a large extent is in China.
Right.
And they would produce the component to a certain stage. Then after that stage, it would probably go to Germany to finish up on that stage, and then come to Alabama for the final putting into a vehicle.
Oh yeah.
So what would happen then with the tariffs of all that stuff?
So this is where I'm going to expert on classification.
I can talk to that. In fact, I even did a paper on that. It's just in my international law class. I pasted it on my Facebook page. So what you do, it's called
start a Substack.
It's like in the tariff codes, the tariff book is like you got basic tariffs, like 73 is steel, right? A car has steel in it, but it's not all that it has. It's got electronics, it's got rubber tires. And by the way, I do want to make the point, the largest rubber plantations are in Southeast Asia, but they have to go to be vulcanized and then put steel or thread in it. And that's another component there, and you have a lot of countries involved in that. But if it's the car, right? The complete car goes into chapter 87. Okay. So I don't have to declare every individual component of that car. I only have to declare the finished good, which go in chapter 87. And as long as it meets the regional value or the country value content, you can say it's from that country, even though it has components from other different countries all incorporated in it.
And then, but what if it goes to Alabama, that town, and
you want to complicate this? So the easiest way to explain this is that if you take a component, bring it into Germany, beyond a certain point, change it, whatever that percentage.
It's called a tariff shift, by the way.
Sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
So once you have made that change, sometimes a lot of these governments actually subsidize it. So when you add that subsidy, the cost of that component goes down. But by the time it has reached a finished product, you and I have absolutely no line of sight on it. Airbus is a great example. Airbus gets a lot of government subsidies for all their parts. A lot of the aviation parts are actually produced in China, or like hundreds of factories around the world. By the time they come and they change at the factory, to even reach that point where it goes into an aircraft, it's changed so much. And together with subsidies, you have absolutely sometimes no way of knowing how much factorization is coming into your finished good. So, from a purist point of view, decoupling is a misnomer. It's never going to happen.
Yeah.
Never, ever going to happen. No other country will ever come to the scale of China. It's not possible.
Can you explain the subsidies again? So like if I have something that's 40% made in China and I bring it into Germany, and Germany, they subsidize that part?
So let's say you have 10 parts in a part of a seed coming in. The seed has almost 300 parts. Just simple example, 10 parts of a seed coming from China.
Okay.
Beyond that process in Germany, I have a factory that's putting that seed together. I'm adding another 3-4 parts from different parts of the world. I'm adding more parts from it from my own country. And the Germans will subsidize their own manufacturing facility because they cannot compete the finished product. So once you have subsidized that component, automatically you have tariffs which are of no value because you have no way of knowing what Germany's done over there.
So I'm thinking about it. It's originally 40%, or let's say 40% Chinese, and there's a subsidy on that. Would that make it more Chinese share or less Chinese share?
No, less Chinese share, because see, in this example, less Chinese share. But in other examples, for example, clothes, the shirt that you're wearing, let's suppose it's made in Vietnam. So the entire textile is made in the buttons. Everything that goes into the making of a shirt is actually made in China. Then it's shipped to Vietnam. In Vietnam, the actual shirt is produced. So it's enough to qualify it as a Vietnamese product. Once it's qualified as a Vietnamese product, you are actually, and that's a Chinese factory, that's where it gets convoluted. It's not a Vietnamese owned company, it's a Chinese owned company. Almost two-thirds of Vietnamese factories are in the south, in certain products are actually owned by Chinese. I've visited so many of them, they're all Chinese owned. It's ridiculous, yeah. So what you're seeing, there's no way for you to know what your China share is. There's no way for you to know. It's virtually impossible.
And that's why, like, as I was going down the rabbit hole with all this, I was thinking, okay, so you impose a tariff. I don't know, I haven't been following the day-to-day news of like stuff Trump says, but like, if you impose a tariff, right, you have to have at least like some sort of metric in mind of what you're gonna change. So like, what's the end goal? Is it like increasing the number of jobs here? Is it increasing the number of factories? If so, they might still be Chinese-owned factories. Like, I would love to like, maybe I just think too much in data terms. Like, I would love to like think about like what are metrics attached to what would prove that tariffs are successful or unsuccessful.
I'm not playing politics here.
Fair enough.
I don't say anything about any.
I'm not saying it in a political way at all. I'm saying in pure cold numbers.
So see,
I don't think he's concerned about that. I think this is a PR thing. I don't even know that he would understand these metrics.
Like,
no, you have to, because
no, I don't think he understands.
But he has people advising him that ostensibly are probably PhD, these types of people that write these types of papers, right? Like,
well, we run such a large trade deficit with each and every country because see, we came up with the WTO rules. So those rules are no longer helping us. Actually, they're hurting us because China took advantage of it since the 2001 and became a very large economy. Nobody expected China to become as good and as big as they are right now. So today, my take on this, man, if you read his Mar-a-Lago or whatever, the Accord, which makes very interesting reading. It's like the multilateral world is out of the window. We don't believe in it any longer, and we believe in a bilateral world. So I'm going to cut deals with each and every country. And if that does happen, we're in for a very, 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 very good time, because back to your subsidies. You tell back to Vietnam and say, you have a $400 billion deficit with me. I'm not going to put up with this. You have to buy X amount of goods from me, and you subsidize it somewhere else. That's your problem, because they already subsidized it. So you do it in such a way that you buy US manufactured goods or goods from USA and protect its IP and buy an X $200 billion worth of goods. And if that happens, this is going to be the best 10 years of your life.
Interesting.
You know, Fareed Zakaria had a very good op-ed a few weeks ago, and I've been following this stuff pretty closely. In fact, you can even throw another name out there, Jeffrey Sachs. You read some of his stuff he talks, or listen to some of his interviews. But Fareed Zakaria, and he did this in a very brilliant way. If you can go on YouTube and see where he discussed. But the United States is less of a manufacturing country. Only 12% of our workforce is in manufacturing.
Yeah, of course. I mean,
But we dominate the globe in the service industry.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, our president doesn't fully understand how factors of production shift to different countries over a period of time. And like, I give you an example, when I was growing up, I must have been destined for my industry because I always like to look at the country of origin of my toys. And when I was growing up, most of my toys are made in Hong Kong or Japan.
look, there's like an inevitability to like as countries move up the value chain, right? Like they also, but I think so. I read an article of an interview of Donald Trump in Playboy magazine from like 40 years ago. It was like from like 1990.
Yeah.
And what he's angry about, and I don't want to digress into political stuff, it's that he feels, okay, this outsourcing, all of this happens, but why can we, at the time Japan was the big,
yes, it was.
power. So he's like, why are we getting flooded with like Japanese cars? We can't sell to Japan because they have a huge tariff. Like that, so I think it's more, I don't know if he fails to understand like how things change as you move up the value chain as much as like why in his mind he's like, why is that one-sided? And so now he's like having revenge on the world.
Yeah. Globalization in the past 50 years, especially when Nixon opened up, him and Kissinger opened up China, you know, to decouple China from Russian relations. And then their strategy was to get China up to an economic level where maybe eventually democracy could take root. You know, that was their grand strategy. You know, and that's the reason why we did ship a lot of stuff to China. And, you know, and we opened up their economy. That was the strategy there. And I don't think President Trump really, well, he might understand the complexities of globalization and the grand strategy that the United States has had since World War II. But now he wants to uproot it and go back to McKinley days. He talks a lot about President McKinley. You know, but we don't live in that world anymore.
Well,
we don't live in the 1800s anymore.
The U.S. Commerce Secretary, I think in the last couple of days, tweeted or something about how, like, everybody will have manufacturing jobs, or will work in a factory. Like, that's what he said.
Hooray!
But I mean,
but they're not.
I'm not saying, I'm just saying that's kind of, it's a very
we've all grown up under the premise that globalization, do you know how like a fish doesn't see water, right? So like we all think globalization is a thing. Like, I don't know, with technological advancement, I mean, at some point, won't globalization become useless? If factories become...
Hopefully.
No, like...
I disagree.
No, do you? I don't know, like I'm...
100%.
Wait,
Because
can you expand? I don't understand.
I mean, like maybe you can like 3D print all your own. Like at some point, it'll just like be so the consumer will be so close to the point of production.
No.
Economies of scale.
Yeah,
will
right?
be relevant.
No way.
Why?
This has been going on for last, when 3D printing came 10 years back or whatever, time it was going to shake the entire planet of how easy it's going to become.
Sure.
The reality, the complexity of your supply chain that goes into, I did a full study about 8 years back on the iPhone, because there was this whole discussion of, the iPhone as being the unit. So I did this was years ago, so the data and the information is really probably obsolete in a way. The actual value, the concepts kind of still there. So when I lived in Hong Kong and used to go to the factories in South China, the actual value add for a $600 iPhone of the top model at that time, can you take a guess how much value add that massive factory with 50,000 people was doing?
Probably small.
Take a guess.
Yeah, like
Less.
it's gonna be like $20 or something.
No, $4. It was so ridiculous. So then you start to dig into it, what components go into it.
Right.
How is Korea attached to it?
Sure.
It was that time it was Korean chips. How is Japanese attached to it? There were so many components coming from Japanese technology. So in Japan, how it changed. It couldn't produce those components in Japan any longer. So how Japan became a large trading partner with China, because the Japanese came into China to get their own factories. So the sheer complexity of just getting an iPhone in your pocket was so multi-layered, which was virtually impossible for a layman like me to understand. Just from the gist of it, that there was no way globalization will ever, it will change, it will shift, but there's no way one country will be able to be self-sufficient. It's impossible. It's
I agree with
But
you.
could there be, so like one thing I was finding as I was going through the rabbit hole of this research is that like as China's becoming more self-reliant, like there's a speculation that you'll end up, that you were talking about like McKinley days or whatever, like separate sort of like economic spheres that don't necessarily interact as much as they used to. So there's still globalization, but maybe not in the scale that we have now.
But they will get left behind. See, case in point, China's rail system, for example, the best in the world today.
Yep.
Nobody's even close to it.
Yes.
Nobody's even in the top 10 compared to what China's 1 to 10.
Not even
Or,
Japan?
far-flung sun. And so the entire tech came from the Germans,
Okay.
and to a certain extent the French. Germany's mistake was they transferred the tech. Because the size of the market was so large, and Germany had no other market to go to, because no other country was interested in rail, and their companies would die. So all those divisions of rail manufacturers went to China and said, over a period of X years, we will transfer the tech to you. And now it's all produced in China, but it's all German tech. It's all German IP, or French IP to a certain extent. And today they are exporting to other parts of the world,
Sure.
but truly. So just imagine, what is our core strength? Innovation.
Wait, so
We
and
will
that's
always
a-
innovate.
And that's the
you know?
perfect segue to the next topic. So I don't know if anyone wants to say like,
Hey, they
Yeah.
did in your article there. They did not define self-reliance, and I do want to make two caveats.
we'll talk about it. Yeah.
Okay,
But no,
okay.
go ahead.
Oh, two caveats. The only two countries I know that have a policy of self-reliance is North Korea and Eritrea, and they're both very, very poor.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good point. That's a very good point.
Yeah. We'll get into like what they mean by self-reliance, but yeah, like so getting back to
Okay,
the
good.
innovation, right? So that leads now to the deepest phase of decoupling, assuming that that's in progress, whatever, which is the technology and the innovation that shifts last, because it takes time and effort to create like different innovation hubs where you can create indigenous technologies, right? Like let's say a China hub, a United States hub, and I have a table here, that you can look at your own leisure, but obviously the strategic drivers are national security, technological leadership, supply chain resilience. That's a U.S. side. The China side is more self-reliance, economic security, and what they're calling a dual circulation strategy. I'm not sure what that means. But either way, there's a mutual push for tech independence, and it's in these key areas, right? Like AI and supercomputing, quantum, supply chains. They're still interconnected because of Apple and Tesla and open source collaboration. And some of the caveats of like if the two countries really do double down on like separating their innovation is that it's going to become much more expensive. Innovation would slow down because there's going to be a lot of like duplicative effort and then there's a potential for what they're calling like a digital iron curtain. So you end up with like technologies forming separately with different sets of standards, right? And that's not necessarily a net positive for the world, but it remains to be seen. Now, what I found very interesting, like coming from having worked in Silicon Valley, was despite the efforts to shift the tech ecosystems, there is like China still keeps an eye on the U.S. U.S. innovation through venture capital investments, and this like totally spoke to my soul because when I was working for AstraZeneca, I was in Silicon Valley. I was working with all the hottest startups, and I was doing proofs of concepts and like evaluating their technologies. And I had one main job, and that was to inform, like my teammates and I would inform the senior leadership of what to do about these technologies. So one option would be like, oh, this is not so sensitive for us. We'll just, do a licensing software contract. They'll become one of our vendors, no problem, right? The other one is if something was like really mission critical, we'd say, okay, we're gonna work with them. We might work with them for a few years. But our recommendation is that we start building this in-house. And you learn from them, and you're not stealing any, like, this is not illegal. It's not, you know, you just gain expertise working side by side. So even in the absence of doing anything illegal or unethical or stealing anything from anyone, just the proximity of working with them, if we know on a 10-year time horizon that our data, like this is like the patient data, let's say, is like so critical to the functioning of a pharmaceutical company, we're not gonna give that away. We're gonna figure out a way to make it and control it ourselves. And what we see here is that the US, along these lines, has blocked Chinese investments in AI, quantum computing, and biotechnology via different legislation and executive orders. And this was both under Trump and Biden, which points to the fact that I think that the mood is changing regardless of who the political leader is. That's why I don't think this is like really politicized. It's like just sentiment that's like shifting. But Chinese VC firms have still invested $7.6 billion in US startups from 2020 to 2023, and they bypassed the US by using offshore special purpose vehicles. So like Chinese limited partners, they're investing in Singapore, you know, via Singapore or Cayman Islands. They're targeting non-sensitive sectors like gaming or software as a service, but of course, you're still learning, right, depending on what the underlying technologies are. They're looking at early stage deals like seed rounds that are not subject to scrutiny. They take passive stakes, like a minority stake that's less than 10%, and they create US subsidiaries, for example, Tencent America. And what I have in these graphs, so I'm gonna show them, is foreign corporate venture capital share of US venture capital investment, and then the Chinese percentage of that. And starting in, I cannot read my own, it's like over the past like maybe 15 years. So we see that foreign corporate venture capital investment in United States startups has increased over time. You see that the Chinese share of that has also increased, and around 2022, 2020, you see it just go parabolic, which is very, now,
That's very smart actually.
oh, it's genius.
Yes.
Now here's this is the part that like really shocked me. So you know how I was telling you just now, when I was working, you learn side by side. So even if you're acting honestly, you're still gonna learn and you're still gonna be able to develop your stuff. So what we have here are, on the x-axis, we have some sort of log ratio where they're comparing the different technologies to like what they're calling a reference technology, and the Federal Reserve economists did not specify what that is. So, and I'm not an economist. And we have the time horizon, and the red bar in these two graphs is the time that an investment is made. And we see that the number of patents in that space back in the home country shoots up after the investment is made, along with the number of patent citations. When you look at China specifically, you see the exact same pattern. The number of patents go up after time of investment, and the number of patent citations. Then they looked at something called,
These are organized by product category?
They tell you in the fine print how they do it. So they look at different categories of technologies. Then they call something a reference technology, and then they take something like a ratio of the lift in patents and patent citations you get for the technology in question relative to that reference technology that they don't believe is a particularly hot or interesting. And
Like telecommunications continues and then some specific thing
yes,
spikes. Okay.
yes. Now, what's even more interesting is they look at these patents and they define something called basicness, right? So basic research, they define it as the systematic study directed toward greater knowledge or understanding of the fundamental aspects of phenomena and of observable facts without specific applications towards processes or products in mind. So these are like really, it's like saying, oh, I'm gonna research cancer biology, I don't know, like things like really pie in the sky. And the more basic the research, the more of a lift you see in the patents and the patent citations. So it's like they're really like learning like real fundamental concepts. And the commentary from the Fed authors is that knowledge flows appear to be greater in classes that contain patents subject to secrecy order from the federal government. These patterns of patenting and citations suggest the real knowledge transfer is taking place and cross-border investments are a means to access that knowledge. Like, all of this was just, I don't know, maybe because of my own work experience, it just like really spoke to me. And this is, I mean, one could argue that the knowledge flow is much more important than the flow of goods and services, because that's,
Absolutely.
like you're saying about the trains and the, you know, that's really what matters more than the physical objects. And I think that's gonna continue to be very leaky, because how do you tariff an idea? Like, it's impossible.
Yeah, I just had a question. When you said they banned like investing in like certain goods, like what's the mechanism for that? Just because I'm not familiar.
What's your question?
Like you said, like they banned investment in like quantum computing, like China's investment. You know, like
Yeah, so it's,
what's the mechanism?
so when they say ban, I think it's really like, I didn't know that either, and I think it's really looking at how they get around the ban that shows us what they actually banned. So like, for example, offshore special purpose vehicles that are like Chinese limited partners going through Singapore that mask the origin. So like, you would say, okay, a Chinese limited partner from China would be banned. You're just not eligible to invest, right? Or like, if a sector is sensitive, like artificial intelligence or whatever, they're banned, right? Unless they find all these other loopholes. If it's a later stage deal where the technology is more advanced, again, they're banned. They're not banned from like seed round stages where you get like that initial nugget of like a few $100,000, right, to launch something.
Is it only the Chinese that are banned from these specific?
Yes.
It's only Chinese, so the French could come in and invest in it.
Now that's an interesting question. So like a foreign entity, whether it's France or China or whoever, maybe it's not the same as like a domestic investor. Maybe there's controls on them too, but from what I read, like these executive orders and stuff like that, I think are specifically targeting China.
It's interesting also think about like a multinational corporation headquartered in the U.S., but the majority of their revenues in China. Is it a Chinese corporation? What are the incentives for all that?
Yeah, define it. Like, is it just like the companies that get registered in like Delaware and but it's operating wherever? Like, yeah. So for me, this was like really shocking. This particular one. So the last question is like, so these phases are in progress at various stages of decoupling. Then the last question we had was like, is this a long-term trend or is it just a temporary deviation? I think based on the stuff we're talking about, it looks like a long-term trend. But in particular, China's efforts to reduce their dependence on foreign suppliers, in particular in these like really critical high-tech sectors, it reflects a long-term strategic shift. So since the 2018 tariff hikes, China has been working really aggressively toward what they're calling self-reliance. So what they mean here, I don't know if they mean 100% self-reliance or they mean a higher reliance on domestically produced inputs. So in November 2018, Xi Jinping mentioned the need to travel the road of self-reliance in a speech, and then in 2023, he reiterated that China should work to achieve greater self-reliance. So I don't think this is a man of many words, at least to the world stage. So the fact that we even know this means it's kind of a big deal, right?
They've done the opposite.
In what
Their
way?
entire tech sector has been massacred with penalizing their top 5 companies because of the whole digital yuan fiasco. And secondly, the property sector, when they started curbing, they went overboard and actually hurt much more. These two things that hurt them so much on this whole self-reliance strategy that they had. For 20 years, they did a terrific job. They're the smartest people on the planet. Now, suddenly in the last 3-4 years, it's very surprising the moves. I mean, just imagine today if it was not Zelle, if I'm business to business and I want to give you $10, it takes you 4 days to get my money.
As opposed to like 5 seconds, less than 5 seconds in China. And it's like so far ahead in certain things. Today, your top brands in China for phones are no longer Apple and Samsung. The top brands are all Chinese manufacturers or Chinese brands, which is a major shift. The top movies in China are today no longer Hollywood. For the longest ever time, it used to be us. For the longest ever time, this is no longer so.
We're talking about the financial side of things where
No.
they made the mistakes. Like
Yeah, like self-reliance is you can't screw
Exactly.
your own companies because it became like these 7-10 people who are very close to him, and you get the feeling that he was not getting the truth in the last 3. Look at Hong Kong, completely massacred. The whole economy is massacred.
do we want to talk about the monetary and financial side of it? Like the
I mean,
You go into that?
that's not what I have, but if you guys want to talk about it a little bit, that's totally.
Well, before,
Interesting, yeah.
do you think the decoupling is going to be a net positive for the U.S.?
That remains to be seen.
I mean, what's your professional opinion?
I'm not
I know,
professional.
I know.
Again, I'm a biotech.
I know.
But it's
But
not
what-
really
what's your?
decoupling anyway, is it?
It's not a like I don't just from what I've studied, just from having looked at this like leading up to this meeting, I just see like a partial decoupling. Like there's gonna be probably like I think it's gonna be like cold, maybe not as bad as Cold War, but like some sort of era where there's like an American United States more sphere of influence, and then a Chinese one, and then with different information leakages like this VC, and there will still be things like linking them, because I don't think you can ever fully unlink.
So they're still married but dating other people.
They're separated. They're not divorced.
They're not, yeah,
So the decoupling in terms of technology, there's a chance that we have dual standards. Used to be globalization, you have one standard
Yep.
for microchips, for telecommunication. But because the decoupling, maybe there's a trend to have in certain areas, high-tech areas,
Yeah.
you have dual standards. Because it's all about standards. If you have the standard, if you set the standards, you have the advantage throughout.
Yep.
So
That's true.
if you can compete with them, you're separate. So you have your standard in your world, I have my standard in my world.
And that's one of the
Beta tapes and
beautiful
DVD.
things.
Beta tapes and DVD were the beta tapes were better technology, but DVDs came in and kind of changed that. I totally get it. That's very interesting actually what you
Yeah,
said.
actually, globalization is a good thing in a lot of ways because countries and corporations standardize where everybody has the same rules to abide by. Case in point, the Warsaw Convention that dictates your aircraft, and not just the passenger and the flights, but also what kind of equipment can go into it, insurance stuff, all that different things under the Warsaw Convention, and everybody's agreed to it. So when you get on a plane in Germany or whatever, and you come to the United States or vice versa, you know that plane has certain standards in security and protocols, and the way they communicate with the air traffic controllers throughout the world, because those rules have already been negotiated on a global level.
And that's not gonna change.
That I don't see how you can change that,
Right,
because
right.
I
then you
don't-
have a world of chaos.
I don't agree because today then China's point of view is that the Western world will decide for me. Sorry, I'm not accepting that.
Yeah.
That's their comment.
Yep.
So that's why this whole strategy on self-reliance. So that's a very unique situation with the Warsaw Convention on aircraft types. But there are hundreds of other areas where China will not agree on global standards.
Yeah, one of the things I see friction there is SOLAS.
Yes.
When they overload a container,
Yes.
because a container can only hold but so
I'm familiar
much,
with SOLAS.
but they put too much and it goes over the weight level, and it actually jeopardizes the ship that it's
Correct.
on,
Yeah.
because if they don't position those containers in a certain way, the ship could capsize. And the other problem is when the container comes to the United States and gets offloaded off the ship or offloaded off a rail, you got DOT rules. The overweight container could have a detrimental effect on the bridges and the infrastructure that the container rides over. So that is one of the biggest things in my industry.
So
Eric,
what
what is it? I'm sorry, please.
Oh, I was just gonna ask, what benefit do you get from trying to override the best-in-class standard?
Who decides that, right? Because see,
Yeah.
who decides that this is best in class?
Well, the
Just
technology.
because,
Well,
hopefully
if the
it-
ship is sinking, then
Like the
But
bridges.
there's multiple ways to keep a ship
yeah,
from
that's
sinking.
see the ballast weight is understood by the pilot, it's not as straightforward as it's being made out to be, that because you have a wrong Solis declaration, the ship's gonna capsize. It's far more dangerous for the aircraft for hazardous cargo, but not for the ship.
Right.
What Eric said is very critical, I think. So today, I think, last 5 years, we did not buy from Chinese brands in the US. Today, we are obsessed with TikTok. We are obsessed with Temu. We are obsessed with Shein. And that's a big change. Where do you see that going? Not just tech. When were we as a country in the United States obsessed with a Chinese brand? In our history.
Well, isn't it back in the 80s we were obsessed with the Japanese brands?
That
Still are.
But you know,
Yeah, we still are. Mangas are just as popular as everywhere.
Some Germans, yeah.
It helps if China runs the TikTok platform.
yeah, and it has all our data. So
You know what? When AI becomes conscious, Chinese are going to be the last people we have to worry about. And I'm just throwing that out there.
So in global shipping, didn't the technology kind of dictate the development of 50 years ago or whatever, however long ago it was, the development of the cargo container?
So
that technology standardized much
Oh
of
yeah, it was
global
a
Yes
North
and
Carolina
no.
guy that invented that
Yeah.
system.
Yeah.
Because back in the old days, they had to put everything on a pallet and then use a crane to put it in a hold. And you know how much time that took?
Didn't that, and it was barrels and stuff, but anyway, didn't that the development of that technology kind of standardized?
So in certain cases, yes, like Belgium was the first container which was built and moved away from bulk into this. But the laws were written in Europe and the US. Where I'm coming from is China saying that those laws are not helping us at the moment. Or in some cases, they're helping China more than it's doing with the US. WTO is a great case in point where China has gained the most out of WTO rules than anybody else on the planet.
Well,
So-
that's more regulation. I'm talking about like standardization.
So
They're
standardization-
two different things. Aren't
Yeah, standardization in shipping, for example, right now for the last 5-8 years, all the tech, all the venture capital, all the money that's been spent is universalizing the standardization of visibility, and nobody's agreeing.
It's where there's a gray area. I
So
think.
yes,
Standardization and regulation have that gray area.
Correct. So there is no regulation for visibility as such. So just a simplest example to see is that the definition of a visibility event varies from port to port, from country to country, from predominantly in an easy way to explain this. So how do the Chinese say no, this is not how we see it. India says this is not how we see it. The US says this is not how we see it, and completely different systems in the three different
Well, in
countries.
the globalized world, in a rules-based international order, you sit at the table and you figure it all out.
That's been
It's
tried.
like this thing, yeah.
It's not easy.
It's been tried in visibility terms. It's been tried. Two of the market leaders are actually Chicago companies. Yeah.
And you're not always going to agree if you
Yeah.
don't agree.
And you're talking about the blockchain. Is that what you're?
No, this is Project 44 and 4 Kites and Terminal 49. So what was happening? See,
Educate
today
me.
you
Yeah.
have this shirt that you're wearing. It did not magically appear on a shelf. So everybody feels that there's like 100 events that go through for this shirt to actually come onto that shelf. Now every part of that event has a visibility tool. So if I am importing in the United States this shirt, wherever you bought it from, I need to know where it's at so I can prepare for it when it comes into my warehouse. And each aspect, each pillar of that, and there are about 23 of them, are actually has its own standard to a certain extent. And nobody's been able to crack that code because it's just too costly to universalize it.
When you think about like the incentives of the different countries, if it's mostly retailer incentives and consumer incentives in the US and supplier incentives in China, that makes sense.
Correct.
But in the future, if you end up with consumers and suppliers in both countries, then you'd expect that the best standard would win. Because there's only a few categories of incentives that you're trying to balance. Like people who cut corners would rather have a lower standard, people who don't cut corners would rather have a higher standard. At a certain point, if nobody's cutting corners anymore, they would all agree on the top standard, right?
Here the thing is there is no cutting corners because there's no better or worse.
Well, visibility is better for retailers, right? They can
Yes.
see back,
Yes.
but less so
not
for
from
suppliers.
Absolutely
So, like,
agree. You're 100% right.
kind of an incentive thing.
Correct. Absolutely. So for a retailer is totally incentivized. For a supplier is completely de-incentivized because it's costing them money. You're
Mhm.
absolutely right.
couldn't you make a separate set of standards, like on purpose, as like a barrier, like specifically to create friction for some reason, to like protect entrenched interests, or to like, you know, like, is there any benefit to like certain entities doing that on purpose?
I see the opposite because you know, your cost has to go down, and for cost to go down, you need to be efficient, and for efficiency to come in, you need to keep on innovating and getting better at what you're doing right now.
Exactly.
And which is where we in fact suffer here. Give you an example. New York moves 25 containers on the port per hour, and Hong Kong 10 years ago did 110.
Sure.
And the tech is old. This is not. I'm not even talking like the latest tech, which can be far more efficient. So we have our labor laws, and I get it. But the reality is, it costs us as a consumer a lot more in inefficiencies in certain parts of what we buy.
But that proves my point, because of the entrenched interests. I remember when the longshoremen were like striking or
Correct.
like.
Yeah.
Correct.
They say, well, screw you, right? Like, you
Yeah.
keep paying, and then at the same time, like on X and stuff like that, they were showing footage of like fully automated ports in China, right? So like,
Exactly my point. Yeah.
so
Yeah, but the will for an average consumer is to actually make that efficient, and you don't want to pay an average salary of
But if
$200,000
no,
to
totally.
a port worker.
But if you're a captive, like, audience or whatever, like if the longshoremen want to keep using a clipboard and a pen and paper, and then China wants to fully automate it, the Chinese standard of living or whatever will keep going up, and ours will keep going down, right?
Exactly.
But the consumer, like, we don't have a say in it unless you break that union, for example, or unless
Correct.
you. Like,
And it takes political will to do that.
Yeah, so that I see that there's a lot of inertia that happens that's like illogical.
But see,
because
you have not just one party involved, right? So from a pure port point of view, the port workers' point of view, it's a small capsule in a supply chain of maybe 23 components, average components.
But our ports are still in the Stone Age compared to
Oh,
China.
yeah, totally. And it's
so
not,
they have a lot of power.
It's not all of them. LA has a lot more efficiency. Certain terminals in LA are really good now. So not that far, but
Charleston's really good.
Charleston, Savannah,
Savannah,
good.
Charleston and Savannah are really good about
Really good.
unloading of vessels.
Yeah.
I mean,
But what percentage comes through those?
Yeah, as opposed to
60% of the freight in the United States comes from LA Long Beach.
Yeah.
New York has around 20, and the rest of and we have to calculate Vancouver also, because a large part of our business, especially on our part of the world, comes from Vancouver.
and Charleston is the fourth largest port, right?
Fourth largest, fifth
Yeah,
largest.
exactly.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Think of captive audience as a short-term thing, because
Yes.
if you have competitors, then long-term it goes away.
Totally.
Like
Of course.
But you don't have competitors
We
in
don't.
the
Well,
long
that's-
term.
Competitor. Charleston is a competitor in New York. for
No,
example.
it's not, because
Right.
it's too costly. Everything's being tried. It's just too costly. Domestic is too costly in the United States for you to compete.
So to put on a train or something, or
It's even the railside infrastructure is pretty decent outside Charleston and Savannah. Landside infrastructure is superb. Truck infrastructure is can't afford
But
it.
even long-term, people move, like from New York to Florida, from New York to Atlanta.
We tried every combination, every permutation combination.
yeah, it's like you're saying, oh, maybe
long
Charleston
term,
will be
like
in
100 years.
50 years. Charleston will be like
I'm
New
looking at
York.
50 years data actually to really see. See, it's also about the cost of goods, not just the cost of freight. So to give you an example, from Shanghai to Los Angeles, it takes 12-13 days for the vessel to arrive. The moment it goes into an East Coast port, you have to add 11 days. Now that 11 days is extremely costly from an inventory point of view. So you're like, let me get it to Los Angeles, and then I'll find a way to distribute it in the US. So that in itself is not going to change. It's impossible.
So
It's geographically impossible.
If Los Angeles increased friction by 20%, more freight would start to move elsewhere, right?
Yeah, but they are smart. They won't do that. Nobody in LA wants the LA port, and they are not the most efficient people. They are very, very highly paid. The port workers there are extremely highly paid. The average salary is $195,000 to be a port worker in And you want to hear the best part? They have health insurance which nobody else in the country has. They actually asked for healthcare for their mistresses. And this, I wish I was joking actually. They actually asked for healthcare for their mistresses.
You mean like a girlfriend, or you mean like
No, mistress. They have all have mistresses. This
Concubines.
Okay, that's an old Chinese term. It's only as concubine.
Wow.
That's true.
Now,
So,
there's
I-
some other things too that goes into port efficiency. The other year, Canada, British Columbia had massive floods that actually messed up their port in Vancouver, and they couldn't be put on a rail, and a lot of that freight just sat there, you know. And then COVID really showed a lot of inefficiencies in our ports because man, it took containers forever to get out of LA and San Francisco and some of them other ports because the longshoremen they didn't want to work because it was COVID. It was everybody was locked down. So either the vessels sit there or the containers they did get unloaded just sat there because the railroad people weren't, you know, there was no automation to work without the people.
Yeah, maybe the two themes I'm seeing in a lot of these things are like existing resources, capital that's been accumulated for the past 100 years, or decisions that have been made, and new tech or new changes that is a lot more efficient. So
It's very, 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 very nimble in certain ways. In certain things, you cannot do anything. See, it's, in one part of the industry, which is the actual vessels, just to run one loop, which is Shanghai to Los Angeles, it takes 5 vessels and almost $2 billion. And for almost 30 years before COVID, their rate of return was negative. They were actually losing money to get freight from China to us for 30 years. So these are flag carriers. So Germany will never give up Hapag-Lloyd. The Danes will never give up Maersk Line. The Chinese will never give up Costco. Zimline will never go away from Ireland. And this is one of the whole things with the U.S. flag carrier. So, sorry. So these are like matter of pride as much as it was this thing, and it's not going to change because it's so capital intensive, and because it was not profitable for such
I have an idea.
that it can turn.
I have an idea since I work in the transport. See, air freight is too expensive. Ocean freight takes too long. But what if we had blimps, hydrogen blimps, that could do things halfway between the two of them?
Sea air is the only halfway you can do. Sea air never took off a little bit in COVID. After that, it has pretty much.
I know.
What is it?
Sea air.
What is sea
So
air?
let's suppose you're getting. It takes 25 days to come to New York. So, but from China to Dubai, it takes only 12 days. So they'll bring it to Dubai and they will air freight it into the US.
Exactly.
So it's called sea air.
Oh.
But still, it's not good.
It's
You
costly.
can't do it at the level that you can.
You cannot. So 94% of the world's trade is on ocean.
Yeah.
4 to 6% is on air freight.
Exactly.
How about train?
International is only just recently started to pick up because of the China to European corridor via Russia, and then of course with Russia,
Central Asia.
yeah.
They have different gauges. Everything the railroads go to Harbin, and then the wheels stay, and then they lift up the chassis and they put it on other wheels to go on the Russian rails. And Europe used to be really bad about that because in wartime they don't want the enemy to use their rails. So certain countries like Russia and China, and I don't know, Europe is a little bit more integrated now, but back in the old days when you had various empires like Austrian, Hungarians, and Germans and whatever, they had different rails. So you just couldn't go from one place to the other. You had to transfer. And even in China, in a domestic level, on the road, Canada and the United States, their drivers can cross the border. Our drivers can cross the border. They're no problem. But when you deal with Mexico, all that freight has to be transloaded at the border. Mexican truckers are not allowed in the United States.
Railway can, but trucks cannot.
Yeah.
But the rail is very
The
small.
regulation does not allow it, or is technically
Regulations do not
technology?
allow Mexican drivers to drive in the United States.
And what is that?
So you can put it on rail and it'll come through no problem. But if you want to truck it, you have to take the trailer has to be transferred to another driver on the other side of the border, or it depends on how they do it. Sometimes they'll unload the trailer at a warehouse and then take the freight and put it in another trailer and then move it out. And sometimes
Was there a historical reason for that? Like, were they importing
Me-
drugs, or what
well,
was the
no,
reason?
no. The reason is the Mexican driver's licenses are not up to par as the United States and Canada. At least that's what the politicians say.
It's more about immigration.
They can
Truckers
do that.
union.
Yeah, I mean, oh yeah, or maybe the truckers.
And it could be a truckers
I
union
don't
thing
think it
too.
had.
There's a
But
lot of
the
different
Domestic
factors.
is not so unionized.
No?
No,
It's a
domestic
lot
is.
of independent operators.
Yeah, absolutely correct. Domestic is very, very fragmented. It's a $1.7 trillion part of the economy, and it's very fragmented.
It's very. I have freight brokers call me every day, sometimes 20 different times, and then they hammer me with 100 emails a day.
So you're
I have to
saying that-
block these people.
What's interesting in your study would be deflation. How deflation will impact decoupling. So all this while I've been reading up on deflation, but never quite put it into the whole decoupling aspect of it, which would make it very, very interesting.
Yeah.
Because if manufacturing deflation continues, at some point, this whole tariff situation is going to balance itself. Like COVID, it's an outlier. It's going to balance itself. It'll find its balance. Who knows where the balance is?
And the deflation is being driven by like excess inventory or like.
No, it's excess capacity in manufacturing.
So yeah.
Yeah, billions of dollars are spent. See, there's no money to spend in infrastructure in China. It's all done and dealt with. The most far-flung places in China, I was on the border with Pakistan, with nomads, with Kazakhstan, and there's like a fancy airport and a fancy this thing. It was like they had never seen a brown person in their life, and they had the best road and the best railway and the best damn thing. What more can you build in China?
Yeah, definitely looking at the financial side of all of this, like the stock markets and the treasury bills and like the currencies and stuff would be really cool.
Yeah.
I started going down and I'm like, no, that's a whole other thing.
Yeah.
You-
I mean, next chapter,
Yeah,
that
for
would be
sure.
very, very interesting to see
Yeah.
M1, M2, what their impact is.
Yeah.
You would have to research a guy like Jeffrey Sachs. He would probably be the best person to maybe look at a lot of different things he studied. This guy is an economist, a macroeconomist, and he's actually worked through the IMF with a lot of different countries out there. And it would be interesting to see what he thinks about global deflation. You know,
I think the Chinese deflation, one factor is the Chinese central government does not have a lot of debt. It's not like the U.S. So they're not printing a lot of money. The debt issue is on the local level, municipality. So to improve that or to correct that, there are some people advocating like to take up debt on the central government level.
Correct.
Because you have the bottom level municipality or provinces, they take a lot of debt. Their debt burden's unbearable. One day, eventually, it becomes the central government's burden. They're gonna have to bail them out.
Correct.
So might as well you take up the debt to begin with lower cost, because you're central government. You have a lower cost, meaning lower interest rate. Then you can control the monetary policy. You can use debt to build up your welfare system, to boost the internal demand, to expand the rank of middle classes. So the middle classes, when they spend, you can increase internal demand. So you mentioned the dual cycle. That simply means before China is more export heavy. They relied on the foreign demands.
Sure.
Now you want to boost the internal demand, so you rely less on export markets. So you're
And they're
less.
okay with their currency appreciating in reaction to that?
No, it's more psychological, I feel.
You also want a currency. You want to release lessen the currency control.
Because it would have to appreciate in order for that to happen, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it's a cause and effect. If you have more export, your currency will appreciate.
Wouldn't the easiest way to do this just be by discouraging saving or investment and?
It's a psychological thing, no? Because
it discourages. If you have better welfare safety net, theory goes the saving rate will go down. But there's a cultural level. The Chinese they just want to save. They did not, but so it would take a long time, if ever.
Look at property also, right, Eric? If today a Chinese person wants to buy a property, the family comes together and they won't allow them 30 years of debt. They will say, here's some money from me, and you,
Right.
take it to 8 years, and we'll help you, your kid or a nephew, and that makes them in a way stronger from a financial perspective at the average household level because they're not sitting on debt.
Yeah, so in that sense, the way you boost, like the U.S. way to boost internal demand will not work as well in China.
Correct.
Because the banking system doesn't work the same way in China because they have this private thing without going to the bank. Because banks are the ones that really increase the money supply. It's not a central bank or Federal Reserve, they increase money supply, but they rely on the banks to increase. They are the one that really increase
True.
money. They're the rubber meets the road.
True. But to your earlier point, what you said was the reason why I feel, and I'm not an expert at this, why they don't go federally towards the debt component is because they still want the provinces to compete with each other. That is the reason why they succeeded so well for the last 30 years.
Oh.
So again, I'm not a finance guy, but their competition led to wrong data often enough because they were cheating on data because they were being so competitive with each other, and that's why the ghost towns and let's build and build and build. We have nowhere else to spend, but if they stop competing, actually you may have a problem, a larger problem.
Right. Yeah.
So what's the solution to that?
Yeah, I don't know. It's not as easy as it seems. Right? Like what they've done in 30 years is remarkable. It's insane. No other countries have been able to develop what they've been able to develop in the last 20-25 years.
Yeah.
So I think the bigger problems, there's no solution to their debt issue, but to your question, but I feel very strongly that the mistakes that they made by curbing their internal industry by property has affected sentiment dramatically. You need the knowledge power, something you alluded to. Having expats leave China and Hong Kong is a very big mistake. Very, very big mistake. They were the people were happy to with people. I remember I had a team of 110 people in Hong Kong, and we would have resumes every second day from Germany and from Spain, and not so much from the United States. People wanting to join my team. Now it's zero, absolutely zero whenever I speak to them.
How about the
Nobody wants to
local?
go. Local don't want to stay there, Eric. All
They don't want to stay
my
in
previous
Hong Kong.
team, they are in Singapore, they're in UK, they're here.
But what happened to the one China two systems policy?
Which is where the national security law that came through in Hong Kong and jailing all their 3 or 4 very, very well respected people really hurt them. Really hurt them. It hurt sentiment quite a lot. And I don't know her name, what she said was absolutely correct. People got so frustrated with the COVID protocols that they're like, the first day they could get out, their families went first, and because if the wife was doing extremely well, she stayed back for 2 or 3 years, made a lot of money, and has to go back. They're like, whatever, we can't stay.
So you had massive brain drain.
Massive brain drain.
So basically, you're saying that because of these policies that have, made it harder for real estate companies to borrow, that have made it harder for their tech companies to operate, that have, caused folks to leave Hong Kong, that's going to make the technology transfer harder, and so it's going to be harder for them to keep up with the technological frontier. Is that the line of argument?
So it's 2 different components with real estate and with tech or finance. Yeah.
Sure.
So with real estate, the debt in the system was not that much, but sales were very, very high, and there was over construction. So therefore, when they started to curb sales, they put efforts for 2 years for sales to stop, and that hurt them dramatically because it just collapsed. Instead of slowing down, the property sales just collapsed, and suddenly you're looking at empty houses everywhere. So many people, average households had 2 homes, not just 1 home. So suddenly your value has gone down and the sentiment goes. So when the sentiment went, automatically it resulted in more savings and less consumption. So that hurt first. Then with this whole COVID protocol in China and Hong Kong, their finance sector was thriving. It's a very large economy. It's what, $10, $11 trillion. And tech sector, it's still very, very good in China in certain aspects like deliveries and finance and Alipay and AI and online shopping malls, for example, or search engines for China. Because it's such a very large economy, they don't need to sell to anybody. They're very large companies in its own country. So about 3 years back, this guy had an ego issue. He penalized Jack Ma, and then the rest of the top 6 people he penalized and said, sorry for the language, but F you. You're not stronger than me. I came out with the digital yuan. How is it that the country is actually saying no to government currency and going with your currency? That is ridiculous. But what he didn't realize was Alipay was rampant in the system. The entire country was using Alipay. You go anywhere in the country, you pay with your phone. Anywhere in the remotest corner in Xinjiang, you go to a nomad and buy a cup of coffee, you pay with your phone. You don't pay cash at all. It's ridiculous. It's fantastic, actually. So business was doing extremely well, and he wanted to curb that with the digital yuan. So he started penalizing them personally. That's why Jack Ma disappeared from public view, and all these top 6-7 companies were paid like billions of dollars in fines. Apart from the fines, they were actually broken up because they had become too big for his liking. Because they are broken up, innovation's gone now. They are no longer market leaders. And before, at one point, there would be a time there was so much good innovation coming out of China. Just imagine if we are to adopt a payment system, why would we start something from scratch and spend $1 trillion on it? We would go look at China or India and pick up their payment system, which is like ridiculously world class. Yeah? You anywhere to anywhere, seamless, fully secure in 5 seconds, how much ever money you want. We don't have that in the US. So why would you come up with a system with your own protocol? To your point, just copy China, just copy India. So that's where I felt that so many big mistakes, 3 or 4 big mistakes, because they were in such a good trend.
The
And
brain drain you mentioned, what kind of expertise or specialties that was leaving?
so logistics
Because Hong
is
Kong, from as far as I know, is not a tech center.
no tech center.
Right. So what kind of brain that's
logistics, finance, and law.
Finance and law.
Three major pillars. A lot of the law in China is run. So if you're a foreign company in Germany and you want legal expertise, you don't go to China. You go to Singapore or Hong Kong.
I see.
If you want to understand logistics, the entire region's logistics, 60% of the money used to come from China and Hong Kong for a region of 15 countries, 18 countries. So you're headquartered in Shanghai or in Hong Kong. No longer so.
This service.
You're gone. So because no expat wants to stay there, they've moved headquarters to Singapore, and some staff have moved to North Asia with Korea and Japan.
But for China's strategy for upgrade their economy, if you will, that's not the critical area they're looking at. They're looking at technology. They're looking at the technology, not the 2 types of technology. One is to catch up to the West.
Correct.
There's already established area like microchip. The other area is a new area. So China wants to start at the same start line as Western countries, so they have a better chance of to win. So there's 2 types of technology. So therefore, the business service, the law, or accounting, or strategy, they're not part of their strategy.
Yeah.
They're not focusing on that.
Agreed. And that might
And
still work for
to
them.
you, that's kind of a loss. It's not like a mistake.
So in one way, that is a mistake because you have gained so much over the last 20 years because of this. Today you have the top 10 ports in the world, 8 of them are in China. They have a very efficient logistics system actually. Logistics to a very large extent drives the world unseen. It's the most underrated industry. I am a little bit biased from logistics, so I can say that all the time.
I agree with him.
Yeah.
But that, you can make all the product you want to, but if you can't get it from point A to point B,
Yeah.
it doesn't mean anything.
Wait, just for some context, what exactly is your background?
I worked in logistics. I've worked in logistics for the last 27 years.
Okay, here in the U.S.
No, I worked in Hong Kong for 12 years, Dubai for 3 years, and 12 years in Chicago.
Oh.
And what
I'm not
companies-
as young as I look. It's all plastic surgery and spanks.
what kind of companies?
Freight forwarding. I work for Kununegel.
Huh?
Kununegel.
Oh, you work for Kununegel.
I was the P&L owner for Ocean Freight here in Chicago.
Oh, no wonder you know your stuff.
Where Where did all those people, the six or 700,000 people from Hong Kong, did they
Yeah,
go to like Singapore? Where did
yeah,
they go? Just
Singapore,
everywhere? Or?
Singapore, UK. A lot of people had Canadian passports. They went back to Canada. Some have moved to the US. The worst thing, Alex, is that they actually have families who split. So you would sit on it was a very familial culture. People would always have family dinner once a week, whatever the hell happens. The whole family would get together. And this whole crisis since 2021 split up families in Hong Kong. They were arguing with each other. One was like, let's support China more. One was like, we need our own, we are Hong Kong people, we are our own this thing. And that screwed up the whole country. And what China didn't realize is that Hong Kong plays a very, very pivotal role in attracting talent for China, because Hong Kong is a very livable place. People love living in Hong Kong, and that's all gone now.
And going back to what you said about law, those people were specialized not only in Chinese internal laws,
Yes.
but also in European and international law.
Exactly.
And they were law brokers basically.
Yes, I have a very close friend. He was the dean of one of the universities. He just retired. He's German. He speaks fluent Mandarin and has written like 6-7 books. And he leaves tomorrow actually. And
He's based in Hong Kong.
He's based in Hong Kong, and he leaves tomorrow. And I see him as like a big asset who's leaving Hong Kong after 20 odd years by virtue of this. And this is Hong Kong. Jurisdiction will drive. Good jurisdiction will drive growth, in my opinion. I know it seems far-fetched, but when you have a good framework which you can implement, you will always grow further, and it's far more scalable. Which is where so much European money used to come into China, because they were very, very, very comfortable with Hong Kong. And then they slowly and steadily removed Hong Kong, slowly and steadily went to China directly, because Hong Kong became very, very expensive.
But I think the Beijing, they prioritize sovereignty. They don't want to
Yes.
lose Hong Kong for
Yes.
some business benefits.
Yes.
But if
So-
they diminish Hong Kong, then it's no longer what it was,
It's-
and so they've destroyed it anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
So they lost it anyway.
Yeah.
No, they don't want to lose. Well, you
Or-
can recover as long as it's in your territory.
Yeah.
If
But-
you lose it to a foreign country, you never get it back. But if you keep it, it's broken, but it'll be fixed over time. It's a big
The
country.
brain drain
But
will
The
Well, China
So-
has a lot
okay,
of
so I'm
brains.
like obviously like a total foreigner, right? I've been to Hong Kong a bunch of times. It's a wonderful place, and like to outsiders, like if you're Singaporean, when I was living in the sentiment towards Hong Kong, at least up until recently, was totally different than the sentiment towards China.
fully agree.
Hong Kong
And
used,
if you and even like the first time I went to Hong Kong, I was with my mom, and like just she watches the news or whatever. She's like, I'd love to go back to Hong Kong, but with you and you have a girls' trip again, but I just don't think it's the same. So like the whole public
Public
perception.
image is gone, yes.
So now think of like all this brain drain. Like a brain that would have moved to Hong Kong is gonna move to London or
Correct.
somewhere else.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Today, I mean, aren't we in a very, very good way in the US because of the talent we attract?
Yep.
Not just the talent we develop domestically. It's everybody wants to come to our universities, wants to do research,
Not
wants to
anymore.
do study, and if today you want to start a business, I think you have a fantastic ecosystem to have a startup in this country.
Hong Kong used to be the window to the world
Yeah,
for
totally.
China.
Totally.
Yeah.
But over time, Hong Kong's status, importance to
Has
China diminished
Yes, totally.
because there's Shanghai, there's
Yes.
Shenzhen,
Yes.
even to a lesser extent Beijing.
Correct.
If you look at the stock
But that
trading
shows,
volume,
for sure. But Eric, that shows that their priority is no longer to interface with the world in the same way. Because like I don't think of Shanghai the same way I think of Hong Kong.
They don't.
that's the next
they-
step is to
Right.
open the market, open the capital control.
Yeah, I don't see.
So
do you
you
see,
will-
But
Or
even
do you see floating their
culturally,
currency?
even I don't know. It's just perception too, right? Like I don't
Right,
know.
right. But over time, you can overcome that.
I don't
Nothing
know.
stays.
Anything's possible. Or over time,
Nothing
they double down
stays.
and they make a more iron curtain, right? Like
Do you feel?
Well,
they will-
yeah, it could
they
go
want.
either way.
It could go.
but
It's a coin toss.
depends on your optimist or pessimist. I'm more optimist based on the track record. So the Beijing, Shenzhen, Shanghai, they can replace Hong Kong. They don't have to one replace one. 3 replace one. 1 replace one aspect of Hong Kong, the other one replaced another aspect of Hong Kong, another one replaced another aspect of Hong Kong. Hong Kong's still there, it's just diminished.
Will they still?
No, yes and no. I don't agree.
I don't-
So I don't agree. Yes, I agree on certain aspects. You're absolutely right, and that should be the way. What I don't agree is China will never become a free port. Never ever in its history has it ever been a free port, and will never ever be
Free
a
what?
free port.
Port.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So Hong Kong's a free port, which is like a
Okay.
magic thing
Yeah,
to
yeah,
have.
it's like the freest
Yeah.
in the world.
It's the
Yeah.
freest economy on the world in that
Yeah.
sense, with a very low tax rate.
Yeah.
And
you
that
can
law,
bring in goods and get out
Right,
goods
right.
at nothing.
Because they
Nothing.
make all their money.
and
from
that
land
law
sales.
thing,
So be
the
it.
law
Jurisdiction.
brokers is
But
that's key.
That
Yeah, that's
still
key, I agree.
shows that they're just thinking differently about how they want to interface with the rest of the world.
Yeah,
See,
yeah.
And it won't be in the same way that people interface with Hong Kong.
Because Hong Kong didn't have their security law for the longest time.
Correct.
Everywhere else, the
She
world
was-
has it.
She was kicked out.
Probably for that reason.
The whole country was up in arms. Regina Ip was the person who came up with that law, Article 23. She was kicked out of the
Right.
country. There was so much protest. She had
You mean
to-
the governor?
she was one of
the
the
chief
lawmakers.
executive?
She introduced.
Oh,
No, she was not
okay.
the CEO.
Oh, okay.
So she was kicked out of the country, and she had to move to Canada because nobody would tolerate her on the street. And this is the freest place, the safest
I
place
see.
on the planet here.
So she had to.
She had to leave.
What
And
law?
then,
Had to quit.
Article 23 was, I don't even remember
Like
the
an
year.
anti-protest law or something?
No, it was basically the security law, which is now being passed last year or 2 years
But
back.
isn't that like aimed
Uh,
at the protest?
It started 7-8 years ago. You cannot be a democratic person. You cannot vote. You cannot do several things. You
Yeah,
are
I think
And
that's
and then the
protest
free
Sunday
press
speech.
too.
Correct. The free
Yeah.
press. The speech is
2019,
gone.
I think, is when the protest started.
20,
2018.
20
18 maybe.
correct. I don't know. I am not good.
I think
with
19 to
numbers.
20. From 19 to
Correct.
20.
So
about
because
a
and
year.
after COVID it continued for a bit and then they clamped down with the law and then they got that Apple Daily CEO who's very well respected in the community because he's extremely rich and bought a newspaper to have
Oh,
a
I've heard of
voice.
him, Yeah.
Jimmy Lai.
Jimmy Lai, correct.
Jimmy
and
is in
then-
jail.
Yeah,
He's in
that's-
jail. That's why
that's
that's why the country is so upset and people like we're done. We're done with this. No Hong Kong person in his right mind will leave Hong Kong ever. They just love the place too much. They love their language. They love
Yeah,
the
they're
food.
very proud.
They're
It's-
extremely
yeah.
proud. After 200 years of British rule, they spoke Cantonese more than they spoke English. It was
Yeah.
very proud people. So it's completely diminished. Completely diminished. Sorry, I feel sad. I feel passionate about it.
Yeah,
I love the
it's
place
very
for 12
tight.
years and so many friends and so many old colleagues. It's sad to. It's a place where you can be completely drunk at 3 o'clock in the morning, single woman, and get into a taxi and you will
Yeah.
be no problem at all.
Right.
Nowhere on the planet you can say that.
Singapore.
Yeah, Singapore, but Singapore is not a country. It's a
And
overgrown
that's the
hospital.
measure
So-
of a good country.
Is there any way that the Chinese government will like regress a little bit for seeing all this the stuff that you're talking about, or
I
they're
think
just
so.
gonna
It doesn't look like
double
it.
down? Or
Doesn't look like it. See, for example, Cantonese is no longer the language in Hong Kong. The standard language in school is Mandarin. If you want to actually learn your own language, you must elect Cantonese. It's like us going to a school here and having to learn our education in Spanish, and you have to elect
Yeah, a lot
to
of
learn
school
English.
counts.
So it'd be like a foreign language. It'd be like a foreign language class in the school.
Yeah, it's Cantonese. Can you believe it? So that's where it has eroded the whole situation in Hong Kong. And food was a very big thing.
Yeah.
Cantonese food, like the tarts or whatever, is very
Delicious,
very
yeah.
big.
Yeah, dim
delicious.
sum, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So real dim sum is from Hong Kong. So that's all diminished to a certain extent.
That's a
All
shame.
the old restaurants we used to go to,
Yeah.
all gone. So it's sad.
Man,
That's a shame that riots happened.
Yes.
If it hadn't been the riots, the Chinese government, the Beijing wouldn't have to make
I
those
agree to a
measures
certain
to,
extent. Yeah, there wouldn't have been that harsh.
sacrifice in order to keep Hong Kong.
COVID.
They cannot allow it to continue because it's gonna make the Beijing look very bad. If they lose Hong Kong, what would Tibet do?
Yeah.
What would Xinjiang do?
Or
What would
Taiwan.
Mongolia or Taiwan for that matter, right? So they couldn't afford to lose Hong Kong. So
But
they
they
have
went
to pay the price.
They went very far.
Yeah. Hopefully they can make up for it over longer time.
The key, Eric, I agree with you. I agree with what they did, and I'm not taking sides here or anything. What the deal breaker will be jurisdiction, because you see the judges which are interpreting the law are leaving. who were fair and straight. The moment jurisdiction changes, the country's gone. It will never come back, ever, to its normal glory or normal standards. And
Well, just on a different paradigm.
It'll be like a mainland style.
I think
legal
it'll just
system.
become a satellite
That's
city
their
of the
intent,
mainland.
wasn't it?
Could
It was
be,
always their
yeah,
intent.
yeah.
It's not
There's a
like
lot of integration which has helped Hong Kong, but that could be their intent. But they also had the intent to show that we could work with one country, two systems, and Taiwan should come to us. That was the logic for
Yeah,
all this time.
Forget
and that's
about it
gone.
now, right?
Yeah.
Taiwan looked at it.
Why does Taiwan fit into the decoupling picture?
I did not look at Taiwan at all. Yeah.
I know one thing, we do a lot of imports from Taiwan. And not just
Bicycles.
semiconductors.
All
What else do
bicycle
we
frames.
import from Taiwan?
Cycles.
Like motorbikes?
No,
Like
bicycles.
bicycles, yeah.
So the best cycles come from the top end cycles, which are selling for like 10 grand, 12 grand, 15
Oh,
grand.
really?
They're all Taiwanese.
So these are like high value added products that they're
very
making.
high. So it's always, volume doesn't determine trade. It's the dollar value
Yeah,
which is
yeah.
determining trade to a very large extent.
Right.
Bicycle
So
frames.
these are hard to make. Like-
I think it's just a matter of expertise in Taiwan. Their entire structure, their ecosystem for bikes is like superb.
Right. Like so, like I guess like what I'm comparing it in my mind, right? Like T-shirt very easy to make, right? Anyone can make it. Airplane very difficult to make. So you're saying it's closer to the airplane side than the T-shirt side. The bikes that they're making in Taiwan.
More towards that spectrum. Also, to earlier what you alluded to, it's the ecosystem behind what is visible. There's an entire ecosystem behind what's produced in an iPhone, which is existing in Taiwan. And to what you exactly said before, you can't just pick it up one morning and take it to another.
Yeah, you have educational facilities.
Educational,
I mean, the whole education system is geared to train those people to work in those factories.
So really, in summary, there's no decoupling, and
There is, because the last part, so I'll skip over some stuff. It's that because of this push towards self-reliance, if you look at the import and export profiles of China, it's starting, and they used another fancy equation where they looked at like ratios of, Chinese imports like relative to like the EU counterpart or different things. Like these profiles are increasing over time such that they look more and more like advanced economies. And if China starts to look more like an advanced economy, it has to export all that high-end stuff to someone else, right? So the nature of the whole, that's why the future is probably like some sort of like trading blocks or something like that, because it's gonna increase competition to like, if Germany is selling something to, I don't know, Brazil or something, and China has a comparable product because it's looking more and more like an advanced economy, you're not going to have China, let's say, interfacing with Germany the way they used to, because they're becoming equals, right? So it remains to be seen what will happen in the future.
It's already there with EVs.
Yeah. And the Fed economists point out that EVs, specifically in their example in the article.
they're what? The
Yeah.
EV?
Electric vehicles.
They're much better than ours.
They're much better than ours.
Yeah.
I get a steady stream of videos from
Cell
my friend.
phones and EVs,
Yeah, the
they've
Chinese
gone.
EVs.
Yeah, cell phones also. It's remarkable. I think the iPhone's now 3 years behind what Chinese cell phones
Huawei.
can do. Yeah.
Huawei.
Huawei and Xiaomi. I think Xiaomi is their #1 brand now. Yeah. And you look at the screen, I'm like, fuck yeah, wow. The screen is ridiculous. Yeah.
What the Fed economists speculate is China's evolving export profile reflects, obviously China's moving up the value chain, which is very obvious. And what they're actually predicting is countries adopting even more protectionist measures, right? Because if they're becoming the same as Germany or whoever, right, well, the impulse is not going to be to continue globalization as we know it. It's going to be something else.
Yeah, a little bit like a block concept.
Who knows?
China's facing global south more.
Yeah.
And last year there was a big global south, probably some kind of a conference in Beijing. Lots of global south countries went to Beijing with delegates, and Xi Jinping announced like certain countries with tariff free. The import to China is tariff free because those are low economic, very undeveloped countries.
Sure.
So they face in the global south, the global south willing to come to China. So that to me it's like a block thing.
So
the
would that be
bro-
good? Would that be better for development, for the developing countries to sort of?
They can
Depends.
make
It
a
depends.
decision. I think it's better. If they come to China, that means it's
I
in
mean,
their
there's
interest.
the global south, I'm talking about the developing countries.
Sorry to
the
sound
global
like a nerd, but I guess it depends. Like that's such a fascinating question because I think it depends how you define it. Like, what are the factors of success? Is it like the happiness of the people? Is it their
Right.
GDP per capita? Is it
Well,
the number
clean
of like?
water, I'm talking basic
Yeah.
stuff, housing, hygiene,
Yeah.
that
See,
sort of stuff.
I disagree
Cool.
now again on a philosophical point of view. Though
Yeah.
I've been to 76 countries and Bhutan is known as the happiest country,
Mm.
and I went
Yeah,
there 27 years ago,
Yeah.
and they don't have clean water 27 years ago, and they were still the happiest people I ever met in my life. Yeah.
It's a
Well,
tiny,
I
tiny
like- my
country,
question
though.
Yeah, it
is-
depends.
Tiny.
I would just be fascinated. Like, how do you develop
Yeah.
metrics against
Yeah.
success?
Well, as somebody who's
Right.
from a very remote village in India, who was born there and came here as a child and had gone back to India many times in the last 50 years, it is still not very, the water situation has improved. They do have indoor plumbing now. They did not when I was born or when I was growing up. So I consider that getting them up to the level where they have not huts, but actual housing, because, it rains. Where they have health care, they have clean water. I can't drink the water. I suppose they can drink the water. But it's, and the streets, there's no infrastructure. There's just dust roads.
Well, so I agree to her point of view. What is success? So,
Yeah.
if success is can you walk 5 miles down south here without getting killed, or having a roof that supports you?
Is the last 30 years of China, is that a success story in your
Uh,
mind? And were they like really bad back then as opposed to?
I went there in 2001. I migrated in 2001, and I've been to very, very remote parts. They have been very, very successful in infrastructure in the average person, what they can buy, sell. They have extremely intrinsic problems because it's a very family type of culture. So the intrinsic problem with the one-child policy has genuinely hurt them. There's like 100 million women extra than men are. There is who wouldn't want to marry. And coming from a family culture, it's not an independent. Here we celebrate individuals. There they don't celebrate individuals. It's a very community culture. So again, back to how we have this concept of success, which we feel is a metric.
I'm not talking about success. I'm just talking about
No,
a
I'm not.
level of comfort.
Well, the two options that developing countries have would be the West, I guess IMF, World Bank, or maybe China's part of that, and this new Chinese-led development. So they don't have the third option for success. So I guess it's which one of those two
They were
options is
using the
better.
wrong word. I'm not saying success.
IMF
I'm just
is
But
saying
to determine what's
to
better,
not
there has to be
take them out of poverty, which
So, like-
is just that. Also, we also have that on the south side. We have some very, very dilapidated housing situations on the south side. But I'm talking about the global south, where the places like, and I've been to all these countries: Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, India, Bangladesh. There's just, that level of poverty. It's not. There's nothing successful about. We're just talking about raising them above so that they have enough to eat and a place to live
So
Clean water.
and clean water. So if China is, if regionally they can develop those countries where there's some more money being pumped into their economy to help them with these
No,
situations.
that's not what's happening actually. So China's the opposite. With the Belt Initiatives, they caught and screwed these countries.
Right? No, I agree about that.
If their intent, to your point, was to get to this minimum level, clean water, clean housing, clean electricity, so on and so forth, and get them where you have at least 3 meals a day, that is not their intent. Their entire intent was, my only way of growing is to capture resources,
Right.
and my only way of capturing resources is to barter. So I would go into a West African country and I say, I'm going to build your entire phone network for free, but give me copper, and so on. And then the Belt Initiative, which is just famous for screwing countries. The countries have collapsed under Belt Initiative, including countries like Italy, of all the places on the planet. If you look at the Belt Initiative, it's same. They had some port and some this thing that they did with China, and they got completely screwed. Italy's broken in so many ways which you can't imagine.
So you think China is having a neo-mercantilist type
Yes.
of
You
type
said
of-
it better than I could. I mean, it's almost like an imperial way of doing things, and
so they're becoming a colonizer
Yeah.
themselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where does China colonize?
waiting for
Africa,
Eric's
Tell me
response.
one country
Central
where
America.
it's a belt initiative and there's not a significant ownership of a Chinese population actually running a lot of local businesses.
That's a very broad definition of colonization.
No,
That's
neo-colonization,
not-
right?
Eric,
Nobody
use that
You can always kneel this, kneel
colonization
that.
is
Yeah, the US doesn't officially have any colonies.
yeah, but then it is
kind of.
Yeah,
Imperial.
The Chinese diaspora is very large.
The Belt and Road Initiative, Belt and Road Initiative, is a strategy. It's a long-term strategy for trade, for resources, natural resources, and it's a little bit like barter. We come in, we train your people. They build railroad and road and electricity generators, the dams, the ports, airports. So they build the infrastructure. So I think all the happiness measure or economy versus the happiness, I think there are two proxies we can use. Number one is GDP. Number two is the equality, wealth gap. The more wealth equality, the bigger GDP, the better everything. It's a proxy, of course. It's a gross proxy. It's not very accurate, but it's a good proxy. If it
It
like
would be a
China's,
good proxy if there wasn't corruption. I mean, a lot of times China goes into these countries, African countries, Central Asian countries, Central American countries, and essentially, the politicians sell out.
correct.
They sell
Yeah,
out
yeah.
these resources.
They do
for
that with
pers-
the Americans though too.
But,
I mean,
but not to the extent.
Yeah.
I mean, the African countries, they sell out to for personal wealth, personal gain. They make all the money. They have their houses in Paris and wherever, and the country isn't really being lived
Yeah,
in.
Eritrea is a good
So much-
example of that.
Right.
there's
Countries in
a
so much
trickle
debt.
down. There's a trickle
There's
down.
a tiny trickle down.
Yeah, just like the U.S.
Tiny, like,
The top political class plus the donors behind them, they get the most benefit. It's trickle down to us. It's a matter of degree.
But let me ask you a question. But some of the reading that I've done in my program, is it true that China sends their own workers to build the belt and the belt,
Yeah, I read that too. Yeah.
and the local populace don't get trained to do those construction
Yeah.
No,
jobs?
that's not fully true.
Okay,
In a lot of
okay.
countries, the local population has been able to participate in this.
Okay, okay.
The problem is the countries are incapable of servicing their debt and have financially got completely massacred.
So China goes in there like Sri Lanka.
So yeah, nobody's. I mean, I can't. I am not an expert at belt initiatives, but if you look at so many country cases where the problem is after the infrastructure is built, they cannot give the money back to China and are absolutely screwed. Their finances are
well,
screwed.
So Sri Lanka, we start with Sri Lanka.
Yeah.
Sri Lanka is a case everybody's talking about.
Pakistan.
Sri Lanka, they have the natural disasters. We're talking about before 2010, or around that time. They have a lot of natural disaster. The economy was in bad shape, and natural disaster floods made it even worse. They went out to get loans from World Bank. They couldn't get it because they had a lot of criteria. And they went to European banks. They couldn't get it. They couldn't get a deal. Went to Japan, couldn't get a deal. They came to China. They went to China. China gave them a deal. You said China, they lose money, but why couldn't they get a deal from the Western banks or Japanese banks? Because they look at profit 5-year horizon, where China is willing to look at the profit 20-year horizon, even 30 years. So they have a better terms. They get a deal, and then they couldn't pay because they couldn't service the debt. They went under. So China, they came in, 2 other companies to kind of redo the deal, restructure the deal. So one company did it initially, one company, then they have another company join that to restructure the deal. Finally, they restructured the deal. It went on. And a lot of people say, well, China get a 99-year right or lease to certain ports. That's part of the contract. That was part of the contract. But it didn't end there. They restructured the deal. They went on. I can't speak to too many cases because I'm not familiar with too many cases. But the difference is China looks at the horizon. Because of state bank, they're a socialist country. They're not for like the Western capitalist country. You have to answer to shareholders. If you don't turn a profit, your job is on the line, right? So they look at longer horizon. I think that's a fundamental difference. He's right. Initially, there's a problem with the local. They ship in the workers from China, as opposed to hire a lot of local people. They got criticized. They got backlash. They corrected that. They know if you don't, if you make the local people upset, it's not a sustainable strategy. So they correct that for their own good too.
So I would challenge you on this completely because 100% the only reason China went was because it wanted to surround India. That's the reality.
What?
To surround India.
Yeah,
That's
the
the
pearl
easiest. So it
strategy.
went to Pakistan, it went to Bangladesh, it went to Nepal, and it went to Sri Lanka.
The
because it
string
wanted
of pearl strategy.
Correct.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I mean,
so
can you blame them? I mean, this is. I
So
would
how
say
do you
earlier.
call that? Long-term
Well,
strategy.
they went. They
that's-
go to
that's-
Africa.
So let me
It's a
finish.
They go to
long-term
Central
strategy
Asia.
to
Let
surround
me
India.
finish.
They try to go to Eastern Europe.
So
right?
okay, this gets
That's nothing to do with India.
this gets political and passionate.
Well,
so
two
I
things
don't
can
know.
be true, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, there could be a trickle down effect, but they could also be trying to.
Yeah,
surround-
they go to South America, right?
Oh, yeah.
Granted, that South Asian region is surrounding area to balance or to check India,
It's
right?
not a
Can you
balance.
blame them?
It's not a balance if you're depends which country you're from. Then you'll say it's a balance or not.
Right. It's a check. Okay, it's
not.
It's different
India's
way.
not gonna go to
So
war
what
with
is
China.
it? How do you
It's not gonna
characterize it?
happen.
But it
Wait,
has
talking about
cost
they
the
just-
country.
It-
It has cost the country. It has cost almost 4% of GDP in the last 4 years.
What, for India's
So
GDP?
you have to protect itself from China.
Ah, okay.
But what are they doing? Because obviously they're not going to have like a head-on war. So is it like more
Well,
so-
they did it a little bit.
They did.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm saying. It cost 4% of the GDP in the last 4 years or so. The defense program.
And it was
India has
China.
one of the lowest percentages of GDP on military spend. I think it's like 2% or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there was no choice about 4 years back when this fiasco happened on the northern border to
Yeah, I
actually
remember that.
upgrade its defense system. Yeah. So that's why the whole cohesion between Europe and this thing.
In
Sorry,
India-
I don't
in
like
India-
talking politics, and
Yeah.
this gets a little bit too hot for me.
Well, even with Western financing, does the U.S. get any say in where their military bases go, where their money goes? Because we've done that for a long time, right?
Yeah, for sure. This is where anybody coming in saying I'm helping a country with my good heart is.
Yeah, I mean, this is the politics
yeah.
and geopolitics. I mean,
Yeah.
it's.
Somebody coming in.
There's the
saying
more. We can do
There's always
analyses
an
that are not
anti-ideal
economic, that are
war.
more like military and things, right? And you'll see a different.
Hegemony.
Can,
Yeah.
Can
the
I offer a
grand strategy.
perspective on this question of whether these countries are going to succeed or not? So I agree, with everything everyone's been saying here. There's a lot of corruption in these less developed countries that are getting it, and obviously they're going to waste a lot. But fundamentally, whether the money comes from China or whether it comes from the West, like the whole point is they have to take that money and they have to use it wisely. They have to use it effectively. Of course, they're not in many cases going to do that because the incentives of the elites are not there to do it.
Yeah.
The incentives of the elites is to steal as much as they can. But if you set up the incentives in the right way, if you get let's say you get the some money from China to build some infrastructure. Now, if you get let's say like the technology, as part of that, right? You figure out, okay, how do I build a concrete? Then how do I build a dam? Right? Now you've gotten to a point where your companies in your country are producing higher value added goods, and now your people are richer. Now they can get clean water. They can get actual roofs, they can get actual roads, right? It comes down fundamentally to the country that you're talking about. I think in many cases, they're getting these countries are getting money from China because probably China has like less scruples about lending to more corrupt countries, But yeah, at the end of the day, like I think the unit of analysis has to be, what's the country that you're lending to, rather than who's doing the lending.
Do you think there's also the fact that most of these loans are denominated in currencies not controlled by the country? Like when U.S. borrows, we borrow in dollars. Europe usually borrow in euros, I assume. The developing world, you could almost define that by the fact that they're borrowing in currencies not their own.
Absolutely, and not part of FCPA.
What's the FCPA?
A foreign corruption act. So the Foreign Corruption Act is any country, any company in the West. Let's say, classic example was the oil trade in Nigeria. A British company doing something in Nigeria for rights of oil. If they do something wrong, they are actually punishable in the UK. So there are two laws: FCPA in the US and the UK has another law. So to your point, if it's not in your currency, it's not under the FCPA Act, these guys are completely free to do whatever they want. They
Or
don't
maybe-
come under jurisdiction, global jurisdiction. So
I'm also wondering, like, if you're leading a country like that and you're trying to make good decisions, your hands are a little bit tied. Along with the potential for corruption, you also just don't have the flexibility that a developed country has to manage your currency, because if the U.S. decides to inflate or deflate to handle what we're doing here,
Sure.
and your country is
you're screwed.
dependent on dollars, then
Yeah,
even if you made good plans, it's all up in smoke.
I mean, true, but I mean, at the end of the day, like the only thing that you can do is, control what's within your borders, right? If you use this money effectively, if you use it to, if you use it to build infrastructure that, let's say, for a very, very poor country, like, they don't even have roads that connect the villages, like the farming villages, to a market. So now if you can build, at the very least, like these roads to go get these goods to market, and maybe that creates some incentive for farmers to become more productive, because now they can actually sell what it is that they're producing on the market. They can make some extra money, right? Essentially, like, yeah, I totally agree with your point, right? You can't control what happens externally, but you can control what happens internally. Like, if you spend that money on this road versus having like another mansion in Paris for the dictator, it's two completely different uses of money.
Sure.
Right, and this is determined by the internal dynamics of the country that you're lending to, right?
And you cannot always control, because there are certain countries that have a coup every 3 to 4
Yeah.
years. There's political instability in a lot of these countries. That plays a huge role too.
Yeah, of course.
But I will say
The
one
US never
positive
involved
thing
in
about
those.
China. So I was just in Nicaragua, and the Chinese have come in there big time. And there's busloads of Chinese coming in. I went to a restaurant, busloads of Chinese coming in to have
As tourists or as like residents?
no, I don't know. As business people, is what I got. They were in suits and stuff. They were not. They were all men. They were not. They were in suits. But what I saw there was that they have helped build the roads, and they actually gave them buses, like the public transportation buses. Prior to that, they were buying buses from us, the yellow school buses. They were using that as public transportation buses. I've been on a couple places they still have them. So the Chinese came in and gave them these fancy new buses, and they're really nice. They're very comfortable. I sat in them, and they don't have the money to pay for it, so they took their gold mine. Now I don't know what the equivalent of buses and roads is to the gold mine, but that gold mine is now Chinese. And I asked them, like Nicaraguans, like, how do you feel about that? They were okay with it because they're like Ortega, the president. He's so corrupt, and he was a socialist, and he's so corrupt that he's not doing anything for the country. So at least they have some buses. So that's kind of how they phrase it. Yeah, they have some, and the buses are nice. They're not fancy, they're not like our buses. They're just like 10 grades above the yellow school buses.
Sure.
So there's, I don't know. So then I
It's
thought,
very smart. It's extremely intelligently done. It's very, very, very smart. What my bone of contention is, there is nothing altruistic about it.
no, there's nothing altruistic about it. But they do have buses, and roads.
Absolutely.
And they can go from one place to the
It's
next.
like our parking rights in Chicago.
Oh God! No, I'll need a couple of beers. This you should allow alcohol here. This is without alcohol. This is a little bit tough.
Because if you just loan money, just like bank account, go to your bank account, there's a lot of corruption opportunities to skim from the top. But it's not just loan is just one aspect of it. It comes with the companies to manage and build infrastructure with the loan. Because your company comes in, they need money to build. So the loan with the company, with expertise, with the management, with the company infrastructure expertise.
That's
So it's not just
that's
loan.
another smart part, because how otherwise will Chinese company do very, very well if it's not subsidized by the state to do these loans? So the Huawei never became a Huawei if it wasn't for the barter deals with West Africa, for example. With so many African countries, Huawei was a very small potato provider in the 2000s. Yeah. They started becoming very, very big at one point because of the deals that the China government made in
Yeah,
Africa.
for sure.
So they've reached a point where today Huawei can compete with any Western telecom company. In fact, wiped out the Scandinavian telecom companies. But at one point, this was an impossible task. So where I'm coming from is like, this is extremely smart,
Yeah.
but it's not altruistic.
Yeah, it's ruthless.
Yeah, it's
Well,
not
nobody's-
altruism
nobody's
at all.
claiming
It's
altruism.
extremely intelligent where the state has come
Nobody's
together.
claiming altruism.
No, it does come across
You can-
like that,
you
that
can
you're
claim
not
altruism.
seeing,
Yeah,
you're
it does
not
come
putting.
across like that.
No one
This is the
claims.
politics
Sorry,
and
did I
geopolitics.
just feel it?
No.
Or-
It's
It's a
Yeah.
win-win. It's
It's
a
the
win-win.
edge of the
Mutual
dagger.
beneficial.
Right.
It's a win-win, mutual
Not the
beneficial.
warm
So
fuzzy side.
I will have to disagree the word colonialism applied to this win-win mutual beneficial, because to me that's the definition. You call it neo, but I say traditional. Okay, traditional. The characteristic is not win-win, right? In India, in Africa, it's not win-win between the colonizer, the imperialist, and the colonized country.
So
But now
But
it's a win-win. So
Which
I wouldn't call it. I wouldn't characterize it as a
But wait a minute, the
colonization.
British left Singapore behind, and they embraced a lot of aspects that the British left behind. So to say
Yeah.
that they didn't win from being under British,
Hong Kong won big.
like
big
I
time.
can't say that.
Well, a win-win in terms of the
It wasn't
in terms of the economic benefits. Of course, you inherit
But
their,
they
you
didn't
learn
economic-
from you learn from their institutions.
Stanford Raffles went there to trade with the local Chinese merchants, and no, I mean to say that even aspects of colonialism were not win-win, I don't believe it.
Yeah.
It's like I win 7, you win 3. How about that?
Yeah, but the
Of
Of
Chinese.
course, there's always a
No,
win. It's
different
not
with
never.
China.
Yeah, it's
never
different with
absolute.
China and Nigeria.
Yeah,
Wait,
they
wait,
take
are
a
we-
gold
yeah.
mine and you get a road.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
And the British went to Singapore, Hong Kong for that matter, with gunboats. China didn't send troops anywhere.
Well, it's the new way
Wait,
of.
are we
Yes.
like revising colonial history or adjusting neo-colonial?
Yeah.
I'm
Maybe
just
it's just the same theme.
I'm just arguing.
I
I'm
mean,
just
it's
arguing the
two
colonial,
sides
the
of the
traditional
same coin.
colonialism cannot apply to the China strategy.
Well, if
You can give it another name, but I really object to using colonialism because that's cheapened the victim countries under colonialism. Also, you slander China's strategy.
if you adjust the meaning of colonialism to say it was better than we think, then you could apply it to what's happening now, and it wouldn't have the bad connotation.
Well, there's a very very distinctive thing is China doesn't go anywhere with troops or
That's true.
gunboats, and that makes a big difference. That
They
really
don't
makes
have
a big
to.
difference.
They don't have to, and it's not. It's just not.
Well, you
altruistic.
can't say that. That really makes a big difference. Let alone everywhere China goes, China is not the only game in town.
Wait.
U.S.
Yeah.
the Western countries, Western banks,
Okay,
they're
okay, but
competitors.
if you have colonialism in India, they did come in first economically with the East India. What was it called?
Tea Company.
The
Yeah,
tea
the East
company.
Ind-
So
East
it
Indian
was an
Company.
economic thing, and then it became a colony.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of the same thing.
It's
is
maybe the
happening.
same. Maybe China's on the same
Yeah,
trajectory.
because it's an economic
Yeah.
takeover.
Actually,
and
they're learning from the West, and they're
Yes.
learning all
They're
of our
learning all
bad
of
things
all
as
of
well
it.
as all of the good things.
Yeah.
So Dan, you said with colonialism, if you change the definition, that's the problem with these. I consider them dumb terms like
Yeah.
colonialism, like terms like wokeism.
Yeah.
Correct.
They're just you could pour any meaning. You
Yeah.
can
Totally. Cancel culture.
They're the words
Yeah.
that the
Yeah.
politicians use to kind of like
Yeah.
I agree
manipulate
with
the
you.
news media
Yeah, they're too generic.
and
Totally agree.
yeah. So
The colonialism one is particularly tiring because
Yeah.
it's like what
Yeah.
aspect it's.
yeah, like when they in 1848 or whatever, the great powers had the map of Africa and they just kind of drew arbitrary lines.
Yes.
Okay, I would accept that as kind of like, yeah, that's
Yeah.
And
crazy
but
colonialism.
again, the goalpost changes, right? What was okay 100 years ago doesn't mean it's okay now, but doesn't mean
Right,
this
right.
is not right or wrong. This is also wrong in these times, So
It's
it
just
can
too
be
vague.
easily argued that When you're on the giving side, it is okay, it's acceptable because I'm not killing anybody. But the fact is, it's not. So
Yeah,
it's,
we've had this conversation many times with Eric.
So you have the last word. I mean,